The Alberin family was a tightly knit, multi-generational unit residing at 560 North Hamilton Avenue in Indianapolis. At the heart of the family were Emma Valdez, 46, and her husband, Alberto Covarrubias, 56, who worked hard to create a loving, stable home for their children and grandchildren. Emma was known as a devoted mother, grandmother who united the family, while Alberto provided a consistent and supportive presence. Their blended family included Emma's children from a previous relationship, Flora Alberin, 22, and Magno Alberin, 29, as well as their two young sons, Alberto Jr., 11, and David, 8. The youngest family member was Flora's 5-year-old son, Luis. The family was well regarded in their community for being friendly, engaged, often taking part in local events and building strong relationships with their neighbors. Their children attended local schools, and their home frequently served as a gathering place for family celebrations. Despite facing various challenges, Emma and Alberto worked diligently to provide their children with opportunities for a better future. They emphasized the importance of education and resilience as core values. They faced difficult circumstances but managed to turn their situation around. Emma and Alberto always welcomed anyone into their home, unaware that one day, someone would enter, change their lives forever. Desmond Turner, 29, a petty criminal, became convinced that a large sum of money or banned substance was hidden in a safe at a house on Hamilton Avenue. This belief arose from local rumors within the banned substance community of which he was a part, even though the source of those rumors was unclear. Hoping for a quick and easy score, he asked James Stewart, 31, to join him in the robbery, thinking that having a partner would boost their confidence and ensure a smooth operation. Turner's knowledge of the neighborhood likely played a role in his decision. He seemed to have some prior connection to the family or their home, possibly through personal acquaintances or hearsay. It's also possible that someone he trusted misled him intentionally, directing him to this particular house. Some people believe Turner may have misinterpreted unrelated bits of information, leading him to mistakenly believe it was a high-value target. Driven by desperation, he viewed this as an opportunity to escape his difficult life. After a history of minor criminal activities, he was ready to take a risk for what he believed would be a significant reward. Stewart agreed to join the plan. However, despite their preparation, Turner's plan was built on incorrect assumptions and false information. Ultimately, their plan, fueled by misguided ambition, went far beyond what Turner or Stewart had ever expected. The initial plan set by Turner and Stewart was clear, straightforward: carry out a robbery, not a murder. Their goal is not to harm anyone but to steal anything they can find, especially cash or valuables. The house at 560 North Hamilton Avenue was the target. Turner and Stewart anticipated that the house would be empty or that anyone present would be an easy target to overpower quickly. They may have thought that the family would be away or at least off guard, allowing them to carry out the robbery without interference. However, once they entered the home, the unexpected happened. Within moments of being inside, their plans started to unravel. The presence of others in the home, combined with a quick confrontation, immediately changed the dynamic from that of a typical robbery to something much more complicated and dangerous. As they started to search the house for the safe, the situation quickly became more intense. The unexpected return of Magno turned the entire plan upside down. Magno had just come back home when he found two strangers inside. Armed, he felt an immediate need to protect his family, and in a split second, he drew his weapon. This shift caught the robbers by surprise. Up until that point, things seemed easy. Now they faced an armed threat that forced them into a corner. In a tense and unpredictable moment, Stewart acted on instinct, shooting Magno in defense of himself. After Magno fell, Turner and Stewart's options dwindled rapidly. With one man in the house now dead, the fear of being caught or identified was at the top of their list of concerns. Instead of fleeing or retreating, Turner made a decision based on panic. he might have realized that leaving any witnesses alive could eventually lead to their capture. Fearing the consequences of leaving the scene and not fully understanding the extent of what they had already done, Turner moved methodically through the house, targeting each family member he came across with a chilling sense of purpose. His actions unfolded without hesitation as he sought to eliminate any potential threats in his path. Flora, Magno's sister, was one of the first to encounter Turner. She was instantly confronted with the brutality of the situation. Her life was taken quickly. As he continued his relentless and cold execution of his plan, each family member became another victim in the nightmare that had unfolded. Next, Emma, the Albaran family's mother, and her husband, Alberto, tried desperately to protect their loved ones. Both understood that something horrific had taken place and knew they had to act fast to stop it. They attempted to fight back or intervene. They wanted to protect their family at all costs. However, their efforts were futile. Despite their bravery in the face of overwhelming violence, they were quickly overpowered. Turner left no time for the family to defend themselves. Every movement was executed with precision, marking the house with blood. It was clear that no one would survive in this house on Hamilton Avenue that day as Turner carried out each execution with brutal efficiency, securing the tragic fate of those who tried to fight back. Most devastating of all was Turner's decision to eliminate even the youngest members of the family, leaving no one alive. Alberto Jr., only 11 years old, David, who was 8, and little Luis, just 5, had no chance against Turner's cold determination. What might have been a robbery that spiraled out of control quickly devolved into a mass murder, marking the house with unspeakable tragedy. Turner's ruthless actions stripped the Albaran family of their future, severing the lives of 7 people. Turner and Stewart destroyed an entire family. The family members understood the violence happening around them. Unable to escape it, they were all attacked execution style, so they saw their assailants up close and knew what was happening. This massacre was not driven by pure hatred but by a cold, calculating desire to cover his tracks, no matter the cost. The loss of control over the situation, paired with their unwavering decision to keep killing, ensured that the entire household would never be alive. The spree lasted only a few minutes, but its impact was immeasurable. After carrying out the brutal murders, Turner and Stewart attempted to flee the crime scene as quickly as possible. Their primary goal at this point was to escape without leaving any trace that could be used to identify them or connect them to the massacre. They made their way out of the house, likely in hurried panic, still reeling from the violent acts they had just committed. In the chaos that followed, the robbers didn't take the time to cover their tracks. They exited the Hamilton Avenue house, made their way to their vehicle to drive away. Turner and Stewart had already planned their escape, knowing they needed to lay low for a while. In the days following the killings, they scattered and kept a low profile, hoping the police would focus on other possible suspects rather than immediately drawing connections to them. However, the killers were eventually tracked down thanks to a combination of physical evidence, witness testimonies, and diligent investigative work. The investigation into the massacre was initially slow given the lack of obvious clues at the crime scene. As the bodies were discovered and autopsies revealed the brutal nature of the killings, the police began looking for potential links to local criminals. Turner, with his criminal background and prior connections to the neighborhood, became a person of interest for the authorities. His involvement in local banned substance circles, combined with his known associations, brought him under suspicion. The breakthrough came when authorities pieced together information from multiple sources. Witnesses who had seen the 2 men near the crime scene before and after the murders helped identify them. Additionally, physical evidence, including fingerprints or DNA, was found at the scene, pointing investigators directly to Turner and Stewart. When they matched this information with witness statements, they were able to link both men to the crime and issue warrants for their arrest. Eventually, Turner and Stewart were found and taken into custody, followed an intense manhunt. Once in custody, Turner and Stewart confessed to the killings. However, that was just the beginning. The aftermath of the Hamilton Avenue massacre brought not only grief and fear to the local community but also the legal proceedings that followed, which exposed the shocking nature of the crime. Desmond Turner and James Stewart faced a variety of charges related to the murder of 7 people, including charges of murder, confinement for each of the victims, robbery, and burglary. The legal landscape was marred by a long and contentious trial. Turner was considered the mastermind behind the killings, both in terms of planning and execution. He faced nearly 24 charges ranging from murder to robbery. His trial began in October 2009 when the Marion County prosecutors presented their case. The prosecution's approach was methodical, laying out the robbery plot that led to the murders. According to the state's case, Turner and Stewart broke into the home at 560 North Hamilton Avenue with the intention of robbing the residents in search of a rumored stash of cocaine and money. The horrific events that followed were not spurred by any direct threat to Turner or Stewart, rather, they resulted from their decision to eliminate anyone who might recognize them or who could pose a risk to their escape. One crucial aspect of Turner's trial was the fact that he faced the possibility of the death penalty. Just weeks before his trial began, this option was ultimately dismissed in exchange for Turner waiving his right to a jury trial. Turner chose to have a judge rule on his guilt rather than risk the uncertainties of a jury trial. One of the significant challenges faced by the state in prosecuting Turner was the lack of physical evidence directly linking him to the crime scene. While prosecutors could piece together the events through witness statements and circumstantial evidence, they struggled to find concrete DNA or other physical proof tying Turner directly to the murders. This gap in the physical evidence provided Turner's attorneys with grounds to challenge the prosecution's case, but it was not enough to sway the judge's decision. To counter the lack of physical evidence, prosecutors emphasized the witness testimonies, which painted a vivid picture of Turner and Stewart's actions before, during, and after the crime. On November 20, 2009, throughout the trial, Turner maintained his innocence, arguing that he was merely in the wrong place at the wrong time and was unfairly implicated in the deaths. However, this did little to sway the jury or the judge, who had ample evidence to confirm Turner's role in the killings. Desmond Turner was convicted of 7 counts of murder, 7 counts of criminal confinement, burglary, and robbery. He was sentenced to life without parole plus 88 years. James Stewart's trial was set to begin after Turner's, with jury selection scheduled. Unlike Turner, Stewart opted to have his case heard by a jury of 12 plus 4 alternates. Stewart's defense strategy differed significantly from Turner's. Stewart stuck firmly to his claim of innocence, opting instead to challenge the evidence against him and present a defense based on an alibi. His attorney, Richard Bouchery, argued that Stewart was not present at the scene on the night of the murders and sought to cast doubt on the reliability of the testimonies that connected Stewart to the crime. This alibi defense placed the focus of Stewart's legal fight on trying to discredit the state's witnesses. Although Stewart had an opportunity to provide his defense, the evidence against him remained strong. Prosecutors believed that Stewart's handgun was responsible for at least one of the fatal shots, while the rest of the bullets came from Turner's assault rifle. Turner's defense attorneys tried to exploit a long-standing neighborhood feud to inject reasonable doubt into the case. Specifically, they pointed to a feud involving Valdez's son, Magno, who had no direct involvement in the incident but had been caught up in a dispute with another local family. Turner's lawyers claimed that the Albaran family's ongoing problems with local residents could have led to a mistaken accusation and false witness testimonies. However, Judge Robert Altus dismissed these theories, pointing out that the defense had failed to provide a reasonable alternative theory of innocence. This weakened the defense's argument. Finally, James Stewart was convicted of 7 counts of murder, 6 counts of criminal confinement, robbery, burglary, carrying a handgun without a license, and being a repeat offender. He was sentenced to 425 years on January 6, 2010. Both men have promised to appeal. Back to the house in the massacre, on August 23, 2008, just over 2 years after the killings, the house was set on fire in an arson attack. This deliberate act of destruction was likely meant to erase the physical reminder of the massacre that had shocked the entire community. The house was left to burn, with its walls no longer a home, but instead a shell of a horrific past. Ultimately, the house was demolished on July 16, 2010. The decision to destroy it was part of the effort to remove the last remnants of the traumatic event. What had been a place of family gatherings and memories was reduced to rubble, offering no trace of its violent past. However, something this dark can't really be fully erased. 7-year-old Jasmine Albaran's life was forever altered. She had repeatedly begged her mother to allow her to visit her father, Magno Albaran, on that fateful night, but Jasmine was told she couldn't go. It was a decision that unknowingly saved her life. The following morning, her mother, Kim Fisher, received a phone call informing her of a horrific event at the home of Jasmine's father and his family. At that address, the worst mass killing in Indianapolis's history had taken place, with 7 people, including Jasmine's father and several close relatives, gunned down by 2 men. Kim rushed to inform Jasmine, shattering her daughter's world. Jasmine, now an adult, said, "I went from this happy, carefree kid to someone I didn't even know." The sudden brutal loss of almost her entire family left Jasmine in shock, and she struggled to understand why the massacre had occurred. The trauma not only changed her emotional state but also her entire outlook on life. The grief did not cease with the conviction of the killers. Jasmine's family was left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. For more than a year, Jasmine's mother, Kim Fisher, had been locked within the walls of their home, unable to find the will to leave. Over time, with the help of therapy and medication, the pain began to subside, though it would never be fully gone. Kim and Jasmine leaned on their faith to help navigate the monumental grief. Jasmine learned that her father and his family would have wanted her to forgive and move on rather than become consumed by the pain and anger from their violent deaths. "I don't live with evil in my heart," Jasmine said as she reflected on her ability to forgive the men responsible. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Ted Shaughnessy. Ted Shaughnessy, born on February 7, 1963, is the youngest of 3 children. His family lived near Phoenix, Arizona. From a young age, all the siblings in the family developed a love for fast cars. Ted dreamed of owning sports cars and was passionate about everything related to them. Relatives and friends described Ted as a kind and fun-loving person. In the early 1980s, he met a woman named Corey at a hair salon in Phoenix. They began dating, and in the late 1980s they got married. The couple later moved to Austin, Texas, where they started a jewelry business together. Corey had a deep passion for gems and fine arts, and worked as an appraiser in their family business. In contrast, Ted was friendly and approachable, easily building relationships with customers and partners, which helped secure profitable deals while keeping everyone happy. Their family business continued to grow, and they bought a new house near their store. By 2000, the couple still had no children. In the spring of 2000, they traveled to Ukraine and adopted a 1.5-year-old boy, whom they named Nick. This moment marked the long-awaited beginning of parenthood for the family. Over the years, Nick grew up and developed a love for fast cars, just like his father. To share these experiences, Nick and Ted often went go-karting together, and Ted also took his son for rides in a sports car. Over time, Nick began to show an aptitude for business. He started selling chocolate bars from his school locker and always had pocket money. While in high school, he developed a hobby of disassembling cars. In 2015, he met a girl named Jackie Edison, who had recently moved to Texas from New York. The two were immediately attracted to each other, but Nick's parents, Ted and Corey, disapproved of Jackie, feeling that she was not the right person for him. However, they chose not to interfere in the relationship in order to maintain a good relationship with Nick. After high school, the couple moved into a house near a university. Jackie planned to study engineering, while Nick pursued a business degree. During this time, Nick also became interested in trading. Despite living far from home, he still made the 2-hour trip to Austin every weekend to visit his parents. Life seemed to be on track, and there was no sign of trouble ahead. Early in the morning of March 2, 2018, at 4:30 a.m., Ted and Corey were awakened by the sound of their dog barking. This was not unusual, as dogs often react to possums or other small animals that sometimes wander onto the family property. Corey believed there was no reason to worry. Ted decided to go check out the disturbance. Since the couple lived in Texas, he brought his .45 caliber pistol for protection. According to Corey, she quickly fell asleep after Ted left to investigate. However, just a few minutes later, she was awakened by a loud bang coming from the kitchen, followed by several more. Panicking, Corey grabbed the gun she had left by the bed and ran to help her husband. As she stepped out of the bedroom, she noticed their dog. Suddenly, she was shot while standing in the doorway, and a dark figure appeared, looking menacing. In a panic, Corey fired all 6 bullets from her pistol toward the door, unsure of who or what was there. After firing, she ran into the closet to hide, fearing for her life and expecting the intruder to find her and shoot her. While in the closet, she grabbed her phone and called 911. She reported that someone had broken into the house and that she had shot one of the attackers. During the call, Corey heard faint moaning coming from somewhere in the house. She couldn't identify who was making the sound. Worried that her husband might have been injured in the gunfight, she felt an overwhelming urge to go help him. However, the police insisted that she stay in the closet, warning her that it might be too dangerous to leave. 15 minutes later, Corey was notified that the police had arrived at her house. By then, the moaning had stopped, and an eerie silence had fallen over the house. Cautiously, Corey walked out of the closet and toward the front door. As she passed through the kitchen, she saw her husband, Ted, lying motionless on the floor, surrounded by bullet casings. Overwhelmed with shock, Corey tried to open the front door, but found no one there. It turned out that the police had gone to the wrong house. At the time, they were at a neighbor's house, trying to determine where the gunshots had come from. They eventually realized their mistake and rushed to Corey's house, where they found her trembling on the doorstep. The officers quickly got back into their car and drove to Corey's home, arriving around 8 a.m. There, they met Corey, who was deeply distressed and struggling to process the events that had unfolded. Although still in shock and uncertain about the details, she knew her husband had died. Over the next 3 months, Corey's son Nick and his girlfriend Jackie moved in with her to provide support. Friends and acquaintances of the family were horrified by the tragedy. Ted was described as a kind and hard-working man who had built his life with integrity and deserved to spend his later years in peace. No one believed he had any enemies capable of such a violent act. Speculation soon arose that the motive for the attack might have been linked to the family's wealth, as their home contained many valuable items. Police examined the crime scene and found 2 different types of ammunition, suggesting there were 2 attackers, each using a different handgun. There were no signs of forced entry, but police discovered an open window in a distant bedroom, where a surveillance camera had been removed. It appeared the attackers had entered the house through this window. A forensic scientist discovered fingerprints at the scene, which were immediately sent to a lab for analysis. In the room where Nick had been staying, police found a chest of drawers that had previously held a .40 caliber handgun. However, the gun was missing and turned out to be the only item stolen from the house. Since the caliber matched one of the guns used in the shooting, police suspected it was the murder weapon. After interviewing the Corey family and their neighbors, police learned that the family owned a high-value jewelry store, which was well known in the area. Corey, her son Nick, and Jackie surrendered their cell phones to assist in the investigation. Nick, who had an alibi because he was 2 hours away from his parents' home at the time of the attack, supported his story with phone records and the security system he had installed at his parents' house. However, the security system had been turned off on the night of the shooting, which immediately raised suspicions. Nick explained that this was not unusual, as his parents sometimes left the system off when they were both at home. Nevertheless, even when the system was in sleep mode, it still recorded some activity. Police discovered that the criminals likely broke into the house at 4:27 a.m., which was the exact time the system was disabled. The next signal from the system was recorded at 4:44 a.m., giving the criminals only about 17 minutes to search the house. Rumor had it that the house contained millions of dollars worth of jewelry, gold, safes, and other valuables. However, nothing appeared to have been stolen, making robbery an unlikely motive. Adding to the mystery was the strange behavior of the family dogs. How could they neither hear nor smell the intruders and fail to alert the family for 17 minutes? Dogs would normally bark even if an unfamiliar car stopped in the driveway. Clearly, something was wrong. The first person the police suspected was Corey. Suspicion fell on her because she was the sole beneficiary of Ted's life insurance policy, which was set to pay her $1 million. Shortly after her husband's death, she contacted the insurance company to file a claim. She argued that, after her husband's death, the company he managed began to face serious challenges. Sales dropped significantly, customers left, and delivery problems arose, creating an urgent need for money. However, the insurance company denied her claim because she was already a suspect in her husband's murder. This was how Corey found out she was under investigation, much to her outrage. Nick and his girlfriend Jackie were also considered suspects. When the police searched Nick and Jackie's home, they discovered a marriage certificate. It turned out that the young couple had secretly married 8 months earlier, without informing their parents. Nick's mother only learned about the marriage through the police, which shocked her. Corey gave Jackie a piece of gold jewelry adorned with diamonds as a wedding gift. Shortly after, Nick and his wife took over the family jewelry store. These changes seemed to help Corey cope with the pain of his loss. Meanwhile, the police received the results of the fingerprint analysis from the window of the Corey family home. The fingerprints were found to belong to the installer who had installed the window years ago and had not returned since. This man lived in Minnesota, not Texas, and had a solid alibi. However, the police could not disregard the window, as it appeared to be the most logical point of entry for the perpetrator. During an interrogation, one of the officers noticed that Nick repeatedly mentioned using the window to enter his house when he came home drunk from a party, or when he did not want to wake his sleeping parents. Interestingly, the police had not told him that this could have been how the intruder entered the house. In another interview, Nick mentioned his best friend, Spencer Patterson. The two had been close for years, and Spencer frequently visited Nick's family home. Spencer, who came from a poor background and disliked his job, may have secretly envied Nick, who was wealthier and more fortunate. Nick had told Spencer that a particular window in the house was often left unlocked, which the police believed could have been the intruder's entry point. Spencer was also familiar with the layout of the house, including the location of the family safe and gun boxes. During one of the interviews, Nick revealed that he had previously given Spencer a .380 caliber pistol. This detail raised suspicion because cartridges of the same caliber were found at the scene of the massacre, linking it to one of the murder weapons. The police decided to question Spencer, who admitted that he was familiar with the window in question and had visited Nick's house several times. Spencer also handed over the .380 caliber pistol that Nick had given him. However, after conducting a ballistics test, it was confirmed that the gun was not used in the murder, proving that Spencer was not involved in the case. Spencer, however, pointed the police toward another, more likely suspect, Nick. The police could not ignore the fact that Nick was eager to propose numerous theories about the case, none of which proved useful. This raised suspicions about whether he was involved in Ted's death. Throughout the investigation, Nick's behavior drew attention. The day after the murder, he independently questioned the neighbors as if he were taking over the investigation. When the police conducted fingerprint and DNA tests on everyone present in the house, Nick's behavior was notably strange. It was discovered that Nick was experiencing significant financial difficulties. His business ventures were unprofitable, and he had spent all the money his parents had given him. Nick's independent projects had stalled, and he showed no intention of finding a job. For a long time, his parents had supported him, covering all his expenses, but they had hoped he would eventually become self-sufficient. Just before the tragedy, Nick's parents had loaned him $30,000 with the intention of funding his future college education. However, instead of pursuing his studies, he spent the money on trading, as he had always done. Disappointed, his parents decided to stop supporting him financially, hoping this would motivate him to take responsibility and start building his own career and life. To reinforce this, they asked Nick and Jackie to live separately. His parents believed that living apart from his girlfriend might encourage him to consider college, much like Jackie. Instead, Nick borrowed another $5,000 from a family friend and continued gambling it all on trading. He ultimately failed and never repaid the loan. Police suspect that these financial troubles may have been the motive for the attack. However, Nick had an alibi. It seemed likely that he did not personally shoot his father, so the police needed to determine who had committed the crime. The police returned to Nick and Jackie's home. This time, they found several bullet boxes, with the brand and caliber of the bullets matching those found at the crime scene. The investigation also uncovered another lie. Nick had previously claimed that he had not visited his parents' home for a long time, but the police discovered that he had been there just a few days before the tragedy. Although Nick denied this, the police obtained irrefutable evidence proving he had lied. Another suspicious detail emerged. 2 days before the attack on Ted, there was an unusual gap in the communication records between Nick and Jackie. The two had been in regular contact via phone and text, but during this particular period, they had stopped communicating entirely. When their cell phones were examined, it became clear that the devices had been deliberately wiped clean shortly before the investigation began. Many messages had been edited or deleted, and the phones had been factory reset. However, they had overlooked the fact that all the data had been backed up on a computer. The reason behind their hasty attempt to clean the phones soon became clear. Turns out the couple was facing much more serious financial troubles than Nick had disclosed to his parents. The police decided to question Spencer again, suspecting that he was withholding information. Spencer eventually confessed that, shortly before Ted was murdered, Nick had approached him with an offer to pay him to carry out a murder. The plan was to kill both of Nick's parents. If the plan succeeded, Nick would inherit about $8 million, including business assets. Spencer revealed that he had been promised a share of the money. However, Spencer refused to commit the crime, prompting Nick to threaten to kill him if he revealed anything about the plan. Corey, shocked and refusing to believe the accusations, hired Austin's best lawyer to defend Nick. She believed that Nick had been victimized by the same arbitrary police actions she had experienced during the initial investigation. On May 29, 2018, Nick and Jackie were arrested for solicitation of murder, a crime punishable by death under state law. 2 months later, Jackie was released on bail. Corey had hoped that Nick would soon be cleared and released, but the situation took a drastic turn when the investigation exposed the real culprits. Police reviewed surveillance footage from the house, dated February 28, which showed 2 unidentified men. One of them was later identified as Cameron Vosmek, an employee of a window company whose fingerprints had been found early in the investigation. Upon contacting the window company, authorities confirmed Cameron's identity. When police visited his home again, Cameron was absent. Instead, they spoke to his wife, who immediately admitted she knew the reason for their visit. She revealed that her husband had denied any involvement in the crime, but implicated his co-worker, 25-year-old Johnny Leon. When police located Johnny, he initially denied any wrongdoing, but eventually confessed. Johnny revealed that Nick had offered him $100,000 to kill someone close to him. Johnny admitted to being an accomplice, overwhelmed with guilt to the point of requesting the death penalty for himself. He confessed to using a .40 caliber gun provided by Nick, a weapon that had previously been reported missing from Ted's home. Police further discovered that Nick had disabled the security system on the property. This revelation horrified Corey, who now faced the devastating reality of her son's true nature. She realized that for 3 months after Ted's death, she had unknowingly lived under the same roof as the person who had plotted to kill her. Nick attempted to justify his actions, claiming that his father had been suffering from chronic depression and that he was merely aiding his father by ending his life. Corey staunchly refuted Nick's claim, asserting that Ted had no history of mental health issues. Meanwhile, Nick's wife, Jackie, denied any involvement in the crime, claiming ignorance of her husband's plans. Jackie initially refused to cooperate with the police and sought to avoid responsibility. However, it later emerged that she had been aware of Nick's intentions. Jackie claimed she had tried to dissuade Nick from proceeding with the crime, but her statement was met with skepticism. Although she could have warned the police, Jackie chose not to. Jackie eventually agreed to cooperate with the investigation, which earned her release on bail. She testified against Nick, resumed her college education, and returned to her daily life. Meanwhile, authorities identified the second accomplice in Ted's murder as Ariane Smith. Despite the severity of their crimes, Nick Shaughnessy, Johnny Leon, and Ariane Smith avoided the death penalty by striking plea deals with the prosecution. In April 2021, they each pleaded guilty to lesser charges and were sentenced to 35 years in prison, with the possibility of parole. As of June 2023, all 3 remain incarcerated. Jackie received a much lighter sentence for her cooperation. She served 4 months in prison and was placed on 10 years of probation. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Noreen Boyle. John Boyle Jr. is a chiropractor in Mansfield, Ohio. He has a successful practice, which is considered one of the best in the state. John and his wife, Noreen Boyle, have been married for over 20 years and have 2 children. In 1989, their eldest son, Collier, turned 11. They also adopted a 3-year-old daughter from Taiwan named Elizabeth. Noreen was born into a working-class family in Philadelphia and worked as a dental hygienist. She supported John through his schooling in the early years of their marriage, but after Collier was born, she became a stay-at-home mom. Thanks to John's successful career, the family enjoys a comfortable life. Their children attend private schools, travel, shop, and experience the World Cup without financial worries. Although the couple appears to be a model family from the outside, John has a disturbing personality. He was often abusive to his wife and displayed controlling behavior. Furthermore, he was unfaithful. John frequently pursued relationships with other women, a fact known to his friends, family, and Noreen. For years, she tolerated his behavior in an attempt to preserve the marriage for the sake of their children, despite being aware of his infidelity and his constant pursuit of younger women. Whenever she confronted him about his affairs, he reacted violently. In general, John could not tolerate any criticism of himself. Noreen's son, Collier, also felt the effects of his father's behavior from a young age. However, this situation could not last forever. In December 1989, Noreen filed for divorce. John did not want to end their marriage because he was happy with his family life and relationships. In an attempt to save their marriage, he planned to move his family and private practice to Erie, Pennsylvania, nearly 2 hours away from their old home. Their situation was not as promising as he had hoped. John persuaded Noreen to stay for New Year's and to continue working on their problems afterward. The family celebrated the holidays at their old home, with John's mother in attendance. He asked his mother to babysit the children because he planned to leave again after midnight when everyone was in bed. Later, Noreen and John argued on New Year's Eve. Elizabeth, the youngest daughter in the family, was confused by the situation, and Collier was worried. John's mother put Collier to bed, and just as he was about to fall asleep, he suddenly heard Noreen's loud scream, followed by two thuds, as if something had hit the wall, and then silence. Afterward, someone walked around the house for a long time, even opening the door and standing in the doorway for a while. Collier was so frightened that he pretended to be asleep and stayed that way until morning. Despite his fear, 11-year-old Collier got out of bed early on January 1. When everything was quiet, he explored the house. His mother was missing, but John seemed to be either awake or not yet asleep. Collier asked his father where his mother was. John replied that she had left after their argument. He assured Collier that she would be back soon, and John's mother agreed with him. The boy waited for Noreen to return, but days passed without her. Shelley Bowden, Noreen's best friend, had been in close contact with her, especially during her divorce. Shelley was quick to criticize John's claims about Noreen's disappearance. She had planned to meet Noreen for lunch just after New Year's to discuss important matters, but Noreen never showed up and ignored her calls. This behavior was completely out of character for the Noreen she knew, and Shelley worried that something was wrong. Shelley repeatedly stressed that Noreen would never abandon her child under any circumstances. Out of concern, Shelley reported Noreen missing to the police. However, the police dismissed her concerns and reminded her that adults have the right to go wherever they want, without informing anyone. Shelley argued that Noreen was a responsible woman who would never leave her child, especially a 3-year-old who needed her. Collier picked up the phone book, found the police station number, and reported that something was wrong with his mother. The police responded quickly and went to Noreen's house. When they arrived, they immediately noticed that the boy looked scared and desperate for help. Unfortunately, they were unable to communicate effectively, but the police could see the fear in Collier's eyes, especially when he glanced at his father. When John asked the police who had contacted them, they did not reveal the truth, lying that one of Noreen's relatives had called. However, the police accepted John's explanation that she had simply left after an argument, and everyone believed it. Noreen was reported missing, and weeks passed without anyone questioning John's claim that she had left. However, Collier could not believe that his mother would abandon him. After hearing Noreen's relative's story, the police returned to Noreen's house. They searched every room thoroughly, but found no alarming evidence. Forensic experts examined the house and found no signs of foul play. Despite this, the police were able to speak to Collier, who recounted what he had heard on New Year's Eve, including Noreen's suspicious screams and banging on the walls. There was strong suspicion that John was involved in his wife's disappearance. Collier's sister, Elizabeth, who was 3 years old at the time, may have witnessed the incident. She told the police that she saw her father hit her mother on the head, then put her on the floor and wrapped her up like a snowman. However, due to her age, her testimony was not considered in the investigation. Soon after, a pregnant young woman named Sherry Lee Campbell moved into their home, replacing his wife. John claimed that Sherry was not pregnant with his child, and that they had only met after his wife had gone missing. He said that he had taken pity on Sherry and offered to let her stay. He also mentioned serious problems in his marriage and stated that Sherry would leave when his wife returned. While investigating the missing persons case, the police discovered revealing information about John's personal life. It turned out that his relationship with Sherry had been going on for much longer than he had admitted. There was a strong possibility that she was pregnant with his child, casting doubt on his story. Despite alarming details that raised suspicions, no concrete evidence was ever found, and Noreen remains missing. Furthermore, the theory that she ran away seems implausible. She had not made any purchases, used any credit cards, or contacted her children or relatives for weeks, which was highly suspicious. While examining the house and piecing together the events of Noreen's final days before her disappearance, the police learned that Noreen had been suffering from John's betrayal and infidelity for years. Sherry was the one having an affair with John, which drove Noreen away from her family. Sherry claimed that she only started dating John after his wife went missing, which was clearly untrue. Collier sought help because he was afraid of staying with his father, whom he believed was a murderer. While searching John's car, Collier discovered a photo of Sherry taken before New Year's. He considered showing it to the police. The photo was taken in front of a new house, so they decided to visit that location. Unfortunately, John refused to let them in, and they needed evidence to obtain a search warrant. More than 2 weeks after Noreen went missing, the police began to take the case more seriously, as her prolonged silence raised suspicions. Police discovered John's banking activities. They discovered that during the time Noreen was reported missing, John had made suspicious transactions. John rented a drill and purchased cleaning supplies from a hardware store, as well as quick-dry cement. He also frequently filled up gas in Erie, possibly during his visits to the new home. The investigation has now shifted its focus to the new house, as no evidence of a crime was found at the John family's old home. Collier said he noticed a ring on Sherry's finger that belonged to the boy's mother. He told his father this directly. The situation became more concerning when John told Collier that they were going to a neighboring state for fun the next day. He suggested a trip to a forest in the Highlands, which sounded very ominous and raised fears for the boy's safety. When the police arrived at the newly renovated house in Erie, it was clear that John had put a lot of effort into both the interior and exterior. However, the investigation focused on finding clues related to Noreen's disappearance and rescuing a boy from his father. The police searched the house meticulously, as such environments could hide bodies or evidence of a crime. The most intriguing discovery was in the basement. In a nearly empty room that was being renovated, they found a new carpet. When the rug was pulled back, they discovered a rectangle of freshly poured concrete. This anomaly caught the attention of the police, prompting them to investigate further by removing the concrete. While removing the concrete, they detected the smell of a decomposing human body. After completely removing the floor, they found a makeshift grave containing the body of a woman. Everyone immediately believed that this was Noreen's body. In the 3 weeks since her disappearance, the body had decomposed significantly. The condition of the body was so poor that dental records were needed for identification. Collier did not have to go with his father into the woods, where the boy could have been in danger. The police found the necessary evidence, ensuring that the boy was taken to Child Protective Services, where he would be safe. However, Noreen's tragic death was a huge shock to Collier. The boy had a deep bond with his mother. Noreen was not only his mother, but also his best friend. After discovering Noreen's body in her new home in Erie, the police found an expensive watch on her, which also served as a means of identification. Noreen's relatives noticed that her wedding ring was missing. According to a forensic expert, Noreen died between the night of December 31 and January 1. The police interviewed potential witnesses, especially neighbors who may have seen something unusual. A key witness was a man who lived next door and was awake from midnight to 4 a.m. on the night of the murder. He reported observing suspicious activity at John's house. Around 3 a.m., he saw John arrive with large bags. In the days that followed, John returned to the house frequently, working for hours and picking up heavy bags, which he then loaded into his car. The police suspected that the bags contained soil and construction debris, possibly related to the creation of a grave in the concrete floor. Interestingly, Sherry was wearing a ring that was identical to Noreen's missing ring. Collier could easily recall the ring his mother had worn, especially since there was a memorable story associated with the gift his mother had shared with him. This made him instantly recognize the ring on Sherry's hand. The police later learned that John had taken the ring from Noreen to give to his new partner, Sherry. Upon learning of this, Sherry was furious, and immediately ended her relationship with John. The police then questioned John's mother, who had been with the children on the night of the incident. She claimed that she had not heard anything suspicious and vehemently denied any wrongdoing. Collier recalled an argument between his parents that he had heard before falling asleep. He was suddenly awakened by a terrifying scream and a loud bang on the wall, followed by silence. The police determined that John had inflicted a serious head injury on his wife. He then wrapped her head in a plastic bag, presumably to conceal any blood at the crime scene. John then went to check on his son, Collier. Collier vividly remembered his father standing in the doorway, staring at him. During this time, the boy pretended to be asleep, instinctively sensing danger. Collier now looks back on that moment with horror, wondering what his father might have done if he had realized that the boy was awake and had heard everything. Despite John's meticulous planning, he failed to create a credible story to explain his wife's disappearance. John cleaned the house thoroughly, leaving no forensic evidence of the crime. No traces of Noreen's DNA were found in the vehicle used to transport the body. Clearly, John was meticulous in his actions. When John struck his wife on the head, he avoided breaking the skin, resulting in no blood. He quickly covered her head with a bag, indicating intentionality. The pickup truck left no evidence, and not even the plastic bag covering her head left any fingerprints. Killers often leave traces on objects they forget to clean, but John was meticulous. He ensured that the entire crime scene was cleaned up after Noreen went missing. The police discovered circumstantial evidence. 2 days before his wife's death, John rented a drill, indicating that he was planning the murder. During the same period, he purchased cleaning supplies and quick-drying cement. John loaded his pickup truck with construction debris, waste, and soil, and drove to a location where he could dispose of it without restrictions. This decision turned out to be a serious mistake. When the police investigated and analyzed the debris, they confirmed that the concrete came from the basement of John's house. He had a motive to get rid of his troubled wife, Noreen, without going through a costly divorce. The investigation uncovered strong evidence against John, and Collier, who was only 12 years old, became a key witness. He understood that he would have to testify against his own father in court, which would greatly strengthen the prosecution's case. The prosecutor's office indicated that John could potentially face a prison sentence. For Collier, meanwhile, the situation posed difficult challenges. He struggled with the stigma of being known as the son of a murderer. Collier harbors resentment towards his father for taking away his mother through his terrible actions. John's defense team developed strategies to challenge the prosecution's case. They focused on undermining the prosecution's methods, arguing that many rules were ignored when interacting with child witnesses. Notably, no adults were present during many of the interviews, which the defense claimed was illegal. Furthermore, the defense believed that the police may have influenced the child to provide information that would incriminate his father in his mother's death, thus violating due process. John attempted to create a strong alibi to prove his innocence. He even convinced his brother to lie to the police, claiming that Noreen had called him. This made the investigation even more difficult for the police. The lie was exposed when it became clear that Noreen had died before that date. Despite this false testimony, John's brother did not face any charges. John's reputation as a successful chiropractor helped him maintain a positive image in the community. He was seen as a family man and a good father. He and Noreen had adopted a baby girl, and John was ready to have more children. At the time of the murder, Sherry Lee Campbell was pregnant and was able to prove that John was the father. Throughout the investigation, many questions arose about Sherry. Did she know about John's plan to kill his wife, or was she involved in the crime? These suspicions were fueled by her previous involvement in a real estate scam. A real estate broker reported seeing a young woman who looked like Sherry with Dr. John, However, the police found no evidence linking her to the crime or indicating that she knew about John's murderous intentions. She testified against him in court and cut off all contact with him afterward. Nevertheless, some people still believe that she may have had a role in the events that occurred. John's legal team presented their own arguments against the case. They identified errors in the autopsy report and even tried to argue that the body found in the basement was not Noreen's, but that of someone else who had been buried there earlier. However, the results of subsequent examinations confirmed that it was indeed Noreen's body, reinforcing the police's belief in John's guilt. As the jury deliberated, the atmosphere became tense. John Boyle Jr. was convicted of the premeditated murder of Noreen Boyle, and due to aggravating circumstances, was sentenced to life in prison without parole. His lawyers subsequently appealed several times. In 2010, John requested a review of his sentence and sought clemency. Initially, the request was denied, but it was later granted, allowing him the opportunity for early release after 20 years. John's defense team continued to fight for him even after his 2020 parole hearing. For nearly 30 years he had denied killing his wife, but he eventually changed his story. John admitted to Noreen's death, but it was clear that he had been dishonest. His real intention was to have his sentence reduced and go free. He showed little remorse, claiming that he had pushed his wife in a fit of rage, causing her to accidentally fall and hit her head, resulting in her death. He refused to discuss other actions that suggested he had planned the crime. As a result, his request for parole was denied, and he remained in prison. John's family shunned Collier, and Noreen's relatives were unable to adopt the boy because they were too old. He was adopted by a caring family in Canada. As he grew older, Collier changed his last name. He initially worked as a magazine model before becoming a successful cameraman in Los Angeles. He eventually teamed up with a renowned director and produced a documentary in 2018 that recounted the story of his mother, Noreen Boyle's death, as well as his fight for freedom and the horror of his father's crimes. While making the film, Collier visited his father in prison nearly 30 years after John was convicted of murder. During their meeting, John claimed that he had accidentally killed his wife during an argument when she lunged at him with a knife, and he instinctively pushed her away. Collier did not believe his father's story, but chose to forgive him. Despite this, John still harbored resentment toward Collier and did not consider him part of his family. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Laurel Mitchell. Laurel Jean Mitchell was born on May 24, 1958. She grew up in a loving and supportive environment with her two younger siblings, raised by their parents. The Mitchell family was very friendly, and many neighbors considered them the ideal American family. Despite the challenges they faced, the family remained close and worked together to overcome difficulties. From an early age, Laurel excelled in school and was part of a very religious family. She attended church regularly, with her parents and later with her siblings. Laurel was also creative and talented. She joined the local choir and practiced weekly. She achieved much success, performing with the choir in neighboring cities and participating in various community events. Committed to helping others, Laurel worked at a church camp near her home. Many of the attendees knew her well, having watched her grow up. Laurel was described as a friendly, positive girl, with a gentle yet strong personality. Those close to her believed that she had a bright future ahead, supported by her dedication to her family and community. On the morning of August 6, 1975, Laurel spent time caring for her younger brother and sister while waiting for their parents to return from work. In the afternoon, she was scheduled to go to church camp. Laurel left home around 2 p.m., said goodbye to everyone without incident, and arrived at camp on time, as usual. She was scheduled to work until around 10 p.m. that evening and then planned to go to a local park to relax with friends, which was half a mile from the church. After work, a friend of Laurel's offered to drive her to the park, but she declined, preferring to walk and enjoy the fresh air. About 10 minutes into her walk, she met some friends across the street who were having a good time. Although they waved goodbye, Laurel did not join them because she did not want to be late. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. Meanwhile, her friends were waiting for her at the park. After 20 minutes had passed without Laurel, they began to worry. It was unusual for her to be late, as she was known to be punctual and usually arrived early. Concerned, her friends decided to wait a little longer, thinking that she might simply be running late for church. They waited for her, but after half an hour, they grew impatient and felt a little annoyed by her tardiness. Unable to wait any longer, they decided to go out and have fun without her. Meanwhile, they worried that something might have happened to her. Laurel's family was not worried at first because she had told them that she was going to meet her friends after work and planned to return around midnight, which was her curfew. Her parents allowed her to go out, but as midnight approached and she still had not returned, they began to worry. Both her mother and father became concerned, as did her friends. They realized that Laurel's behavior was unusual. Worried about her well-being, her parents decided to take action instead of waiting. Her mother immediately began trying to find out what had happened to her daughter. Knowing that 17-year-old Laurel was very close to her friends, most of whom lived nearby, her parents decided to contact them despite the late hour, as their worries had grown too great. Laurel's best friend lived right across the street, and they often spent time together. So when Laurel wasn't at her friend's house, her parents were surprised. At that time, her friend had returned home, which raised their concerns. After talking to her friend, Laurel's parents were shocked to learn that she had not gone to the park to meet them, and that they had gone for a walk without her. Her parents searched for Laurel along the path she would have taken, but found no sign of her. They planned to go home, hoping that she would be back by then, but she did not return. Worried, the family began calling everyone they knew who might have seen Laurel, despite the late hour. Most people were sympathetic, but unfortunately, no one knew where she was. They eventually decided to call the police to report her missing. Sadly, the police responded with the usual excuses, saying that since Laurel was 17 and was supposed to be with friends, she may have run away due to a conflict with her parents or simply been with someone else. They speculated that she might have had too much to drink and was unable to return home. However, her parents insisted that this behavior was completely out of character for Laurel. Laurel spent most of her time at home and at church, but the police did not listen to their concerns. Determined to find Laurel, her parents and others spent nearly an hour at the police station trying to convince the officers that she would never have missed a meeting with friends or broken curfew. Eventually, the police seemed to take action. By this time, a large group of townspeople were anxious to know what had happened to Laurel. Everyone in the community knew each other, and the idea that a young girl could be in danger in such a quiet town, where nothing like this had ever happened, was shocking. Laurel's parents made a phone call, and a crowd gathered outside the police station, ready to help. Despite the late hour, the people were determined to search for Laurel along with the police. First, they checked the camp near the church, along the route Laurel had taken. However, they found no sign of her along the entire path she might have followed. Then the group split up and searched the city until dawn, but unfortunately, they still found no clues. By 10:30 a.m., the search of the homes of Laurel's friends, whom she was supposed to meet, was nearly complete. The hope that she had simply gone out to have fun had evaporated. Naturally, there was interest in the missing girl's relatives. The Mitchell family had made extensive efforts to identify any potential suspects in Laurel's vicinity. However, they ruled them out, one by one. Laurel had a good social circle, with no signs of cruelty or criminality. Her friends could provide no leads for the investigation. There were no suspicious boyfriends or manipulative individuals in her life, as she had never dated anyone or even thought about boys. There were no jealous suitors who could harm her. Rumors began to spread, and the local community started to pressure the police for answers. Eventually, the police learned that Laurel had met a group of friends about 10 minutes earlier and had passed by them. They reported that they had seen nothing unusual. Laurel seemed happy and was not being followed. So what could have happened to her? A few kilometers north of the city, a man was fishing with his son on the river. Everything seemed calm until he noticed something suspicious floating downstream. Out of curiosity, he decided to row his boat closer. To his horror, he discovered that it was the body of a girl. The man was terrified, thinking that she might have had an accident and drowned. He believed he could still save her, so he pulled her body into the boat and tried to help. However, he soon realized that she was too cold, despite the warm weather. When all his efforts failed, he brought her body to shore with his son. He spotted a passing car and asked the driver to call for help. At the time, Laurel Mitchell's disappearance had not yet been officially reported. Since she had no identification, it was difficult to identify her. The police responded to the call. It turned out that the man and his son were not from the area and did not know Laurel. The police noticed a ring with her initials engraved on her finger. A few hours later, Laurel was officially reported missing, and her initials confirmed her identity. Her parents were able to identify her immediately. Initially, there was an assumption that she may have accidentally fallen off the bridge, slipped, and drowned, possibly due to not knowing how to swim or being intoxicated. However, her parents quickly dismissed these thoughts. They knew that swimming was a regular part of Laurel's training. She had always loved water and enjoyed swimming since childhood, so she could have swum out of the reservoir if she had accidentally fallen in. Additionally, her family and friends confirmed that she had not been drinking. She had not intended to cross the bridge that night, as it was not on her route, making it unlikely that she had accidentally ended up there. Despite this, the police remained skeptical of the family's beliefs. Laurel was found in a large river with a strong current. In some areas, the current is so powerful that even professional swimmers avoid it. According to the police, Laurel may have fallen into the water or gone swimming and become a victim of the current. She may have been swept away and been unable to handle the situation. This theory is supported by the existence of areas marked as too dangerous to swim. Forensic experts were quick to dismiss the police's explanation. Laurel had numerous bruises indicating that she had been beaten, an apparent case of violent death. Many of her injuries appeared to be defensive wounds, particularly on her arms and upper chest. Her face and head were severely injured, suggesting that she had been struck with a blunt object. The cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma, indicating an attempt to conceal the evidence by dumping her body in the river. The body had been submerged in water for a long time, causing most of the evidence to wash away. The remaining traces could not be thoroughly analyzed because DNA testing was still in its early stages, which caused the investigation to stall. Although the police had some evidence in the form of suspicious biological traces, they were too small to be of any use. All of the items recovered, such as Laurel's clothes, shoes, and underwear that showed these traces, were eventually stored. At the funeral, the church was so crowded that many attendees had to stand outside. People expressed their condolences to Laurel's family and hoped that the case would be solved soon. The investigation soon stalled and only made progress a few months later when an anonymous witness called the police from a public phone. She claimed to know what had happened to Laurel, but when the police began asking questions, she abruptly hung up and was never found again. The police made a public appeal to find the girl who had called them. They assured her that her identity would be kept confidential and that she would be safe, providing any protection she might need. They urged her to contact them again and share any information she had. To encourage her, they even offered a reward of $50,000, a substantial sum at the time. Despite this, the girl did not call back. Unfortunately, the reward led to trouble as the police received some false information, wasting resources on unnecessary investigations. 6 months after Laurel's death, a woman contacted the police. She lived across the street from where Laurel had walked to the park that evening. She reported seeing Laurel at 10:15 p.m., the same time she was returning from work. While she was at home, she heard a strange noise outside. It sounded like a car had stopped suddenly in front of her house, followed by the screams of young people. When she looked out the window, she saw one of the trunks slam shut. Laurel, who had disappeared from view for a moment, was seen by a housewife. The housewife noticed a red car with strange young men inside, who quickly drove away. Although she could not see the faces or the license plate, she provided a description of the car. It was a bright red car, quite recognizable at the time. The police were very interested in this information and began investigating all the car owners matching that description. However, for a month, they found no clues, much to the frustration of the police and Laurel's family. The investigation hit a dead end again. Decades later, in the early 2010s, advances in technology and methods, including genetic analysis, allowed for a more thorough examination of the available evidence. Profiling techniques were also used, leading to the creation of a psychological profile of the suspect. FBI agents were even brought in to assist. The profiler suggested that the suspect was likely a young man who lived in or near the area, had a history of violent crime, and possibly a criminal record. Despite these efforts, the investigation into Laurel's case made little progress. The DNA samples from the evidence were too limited to be analyzed comprehensively, hampering the police's efforts to solve the crime. During this time, a team was formed to tackle unsolved cases. Finally, the case of Laurel Mitchell came to the attention of her elderly parents. They once again expressed their desire to confront the brutal criminal who had beaten their innocent daughter to death. The police chose to restart the investigation, ignoring all the controversial conclusions from over 30 years ago. Sadly, Laurel's parents died before the police could answer their long-standing questions. As of 2012, the culprit remains unidentified. After the tragedy, Laurel's brother and sister were determined to continue their fight for justice. They believed that the media could help promote their efforts, so they issued several news reports about the investigation, which had been ongoing for nearly 4 years. A few months into their media campaign, they began to see progress with the police. A woman who had lived in the area in 1975 and was the same age as Laurel came forward to share her story. About a week after Laurel's murder, she had met a man named John Wayne Lehman at a party, and they had begun a long-term relationship. At another party, John confessed to her about a traumatic incident that had occurred that summer. He revealed that he had witnessed his friend attacking a girl on the street and felt helpless because he could not intervene. John gave a detailed account of the crime, but maintained that he did not kill Laurel. Instead, he claimed that it was his friend. At the time, she did not believe him. When she went to the police station and repeated what John had said, the police became interested. The information she provided about the attack and murder included details that had not been reported in the media, raising suspicions. Despite this, the investigation remained challenging. The woman mentioned that she had broken up with John shortly after his confession and that she did not know about his current situation. He was not listed in the police database, indicating that he had no legal problems. The police sought to identify John's friend. The woman struggled to remember her friend's name. To help her recall, the police provided her with a list of former suspects and potential witnesses in the case. She recognized the name Fred Bandy Jr. 2 years after Laurel's death, a young man came to the police station, stating that he had met Fred, who had no stable home, job, or education. He described Fred as having an anger problem that he could not control. During one of their meetings, Fred confided in him that a friend named John had attacked a girl on the street for no reason. When the girl fought back, Fred became angry and started hitting her. He continued to attack her even after she passed out and fell to the ground. Fred claimed that he lost control at that point, which ultimately led to the girl's death. To cover up their crime, they dumped the girl's body in the river, At the time, the police did not take the young man's testimony seriously because he could not provide the girl's name, making it impossible to verify his account. Initially, the police ignored the situation, but eventually remembered it. However, they did not take action because they could not verify his testimony. After reviewing the report, the police discovered that John Wayne Lehman and Fred Bandy Jr. were involved in the case. Now, the police decided to take a closer look at the main suspects. However, at this time, they still had no information about John or Fred. Finally, the police had advanced technology that could analyze even the smallest traces. In 2019, they decided to test all the evidence collected from Laurel's murder, including her clothes, shoes, underwear, and a ring. Contrary to expectations, the testing process took nearly a year, even with these improved methods. In February 2020, a major breakthrough occurred when forensic scientists discovered microscopic traces on Laurel's clothing that had gone unnoticed for decades. The authorities had enough samples from Fred, who had a history of violent crimes, and his DNA was stored in a database. They needed time to compare these samples. Unfortunately, the initial results only showed an 80% match, which was not conclusive enough, so the investigation continued. After conducting further analysis using different methods, they achieved a near 100% match with Fred's samples. Finally, in 2023, the decision was made to arrest Fred Bandy Jr. and his friend John Wayne Lehman. Police noted that Fred had a history of 3 violent crimes, all targeting young girls, but he had only been convicted of one of these crimes. Fred served a short sentence and was released. He has now admitted to attacking Laurel Mitchell and mentioned that his friend John owned a red car in 1975. He tried to blame John but could not explain why only his DNA was found on Laurel's body. Both men were arrested nearly 48 years after Laurel's murder. Laurel's younger brother and sister struggled to understand how the killers were able to live freely while the police failed to catch them all these years. It was expected that they would accuse each other. Fred blamed John for everything, while John insisted that Fred was responsible for abusing and killing Laurel and drowning her. He denied any involvement in the murder, claiming that his fear of Fred had prevented him from intervening or speaking up until now. After hearing arguments from both sides, the jury reached a decision. Within an hour, they found Fred Bandy Jr. guilty of first-degree murder. At the time, Fred was 69 years old. At the sentencing hearing that followed, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. It is important to note that Fred was tried under a 1975 law. At that time, he could have faced life in prison with the possibility of parole or the death penalty. However, the death penalty has since been abolished in that state. As a result, Fred will spend the rest of his life in prison. John Wayne Lehman, who was 68 years old when he was arrested in Indiana, negotiated a deal with the prosecution by pleading guilty to conspiracy to commit murder. Because of his cooperation, John was sentenced to only 8 years in prison, with the possibility of parole. In exchange for this leniency, John had to testify for the prosecution during the trial. After the murderers were convicted, Laurel's 62-year-old younger sister released balloons into the sky that read, "We got him." This allowed the family to celebrate a long-overdue victory for justice. Hello everyone. Today we will learn about another case, the case of Susan Bailey. Susan was born in 1965 in a small town in Minnesota, USA. She was an ordinary, carefree girl who easily made friends and was sociable. Partly due to having many siblings, her parents had 4 children in total. Susan was smart, did well in school, and was responsible and non-confrontational. From a young age, her parents taught her the importance of independence and hard work. After graduating from high school, Susan enrolled in a local college. To avoid burdening her parents financially while paying for her education, she took a job as a saleswoman. It seemed like everything was falling into place for her. However, she never enjoyed the cold and gray weather of Minnesota and dreamed of moving south. After completing her studies, she decided to relocate to another state. This decision led Susan to the sunny beaches of California, fulfilling her childhood dream. There, she quickly found a job in retail and met a man, Mr. Bailey, who would become her husband. He was calm and reserved, pursuing a military career. They married in 1988. Although Susan's family disapproved of her choice due to the challenges of Mr. Bailey's profession, they ultimately accepted her decision. In the following years, they moved several times because of her husband's military service. While he worked, Susan spent most of her time at home and felt unhappy with this lifestyle. However, he promised to leave the military after his contract ended, which he did in 1990. They then returned to California, and Susan decided to become pregnant with their first child, a girl named Jennifer. 4 years later, they welcomed another child. They chose to focus on their careers to support their growing family. During this time, Susan found success in her retail career and became the primary breadwinner, while her husband struggled in his job. They switched roles, with him taking on the role of a stay-at-home dad, and Susan working to provide for the family. This change was made possible when Susan accepted a job with a new clothing company. In 1997, she was promoted to regional manager of Texas, which came with significant responsibilities. Susan realized she couldn't turn down this opportunity. She and the children relocated to Texas, where they decided to settle in a small town called Denton. In 2000, the Bailey family purchased a house with 4 bedrooms, a living room, and a separate playroom in the small town. It seemed like a perfect place for a peaceful family life. As Susan became part of the local community, she met her neighbors. They had children of school age and lived across the street. They spent a lot of time together, discussing local news. However, Susan later discovered something troubling. Whenever Jennifer visited the neighbor, she would leave with items in her hands. After these visits, the neighboring family noticed that money and belongings were missing, leading them to suspect that Jennifer was stealing. Despite this, her neighbor never brought up her concerns with Susan, possibly thinking that Susan was too busy with work and did not want to burden her with additional problems. As a result, the relationship with the neighbors became strained. Susan's son David faced several challenges. He struggled with bedwetting, which required her to change the bedding nearly every day, causing her stress. Additionally, David had behavioral issues and frequently got into trouble. However, these problems were minor compared to the bankruptcy of Susan's company, which led to her losing her job and significant income, severely impacting their family. At that time, she had started her own small cosmetic shop, but it did not compensate for the loss of her managerial position in a large firm. Eventually, she found work at another clothing store, but her new salary was much lower than her previous earnings. During this period, Susan realized her independence, while her husband struggled to find a job to support her. Their relationship became strained, and by 2006, they officially divorced. It remains unclear why her husband did not take any initiative to fight for custody of their children or their assets. He simply left everything to Susan without hesitation and agreed to pay child support. Susan was struggling with her own problems as well as those of her son and daughter, and everything seemed to be getting worse. For the first time, she felt overwhelmed by her new responsibilities. At the same time, she had to work 2 jobs to keep the family financially stable and avoid debt. This left her with little time to spend with her children. Susan was hardly ever home, and the children felt neglected. David was falling behind in school, skipping classes, and even resorting to self-harm in an attempt to get his mother's attention. His sister Jennifer took care of him, but she felt uncomfortable in that role and wanted to enjoy her own life instead. She often expressed her frustration about this. During this time, Jennifer met a boy named Paul Henson, who was a year younger than her. He lived with his family in a trailer park. Paul mentioned that he came from a troubled family, which resonated with Jennifer as she could relate to his struggles. However, Paul was quite unusual. He believed he had two distinct personalities. He described one of his two personalities as a reincarnation of a 10th century executioner, referring to it as his evil alter ego. Many of his classmates noticed Paul talking to himself, conversing with imaginary people and speaking in languages no one understood. He spent most of his free time playing fantasy computer games. Despite his unusual behavior, Paul genuinely liked Jennifer, and they started dating. Jennifer thought his eccentricities were just a product of his vivid imagination and gradually began to share his interests, playing the same games and acting oddly. For instance, they wore dog collars with each other's names. They also engaged in dark mystical practices, which eventually led to a love triangle. Paul revealed to Jennifer that one of his personalities was fond of her, while another personality of his had feelings for a girl named Marilee. Marilee was a 14-year-old from a wealthy family who appeared naive and impressionable. Marilee and Jennifer both fell under his influence, believing they all had mutual feelings for each other, leading to a complicated emotional situation. Susan Bailey strongly disliked Paul from the start and encouraged her daughter to end her relationship with the unusual Paul. However, Jennifer refused to heed her family's warnings. As a result, both their relationship and the home environment worsened quickly. Despite being told not to communicate with Paul, Jennifer was seen with him during the day when all the adults were home. Additionally, Jennifer regularly ignored her mother's requests regarding her schoolwork, chores, and taking care of David. Jennifer got a job at a fast food restaurant, which meant she was hardly ever home. This worried Susan, as David was often left unsupervised. To help, Susan's parents agreed to take David in for the month of July. During this time, they noticed an improvement in his behavior. They taught him household chores and introduced him to activities like fishing. However, they also observed some concerning behavior when David threw a tantrum in the car after his grandparents refused to buy him something on a whim. He rocked the car back and forth in frustration but calmed down as soon as they got home. This incident made his grandmother realize that David was struggling with emotional issues. Determined to help David, his grandparents began taking him to various doctors and clinics. His grandmother wanted him to stay longer so they could address his problems, but Susan was reluctant to let him stay for too long. Eventually, she bought a ticket and insisted that David return home. When he did, he surprised his mother and sister with his good behavior, and even brought Jennifer a small gift. At this point, Susan had been considering buying a car for Jennifer to make her commute to work easier, but Susan realized she didn't have enough money. Jennifer was unhappy about this and insisted she needed a car for convenience. Her mother asked her to be patient. A month later, Susan was shocked to receive a bill for the children's phone services that totaled $1,500. She found out that Jennifer had been spending all her free time talking to Paul, while David was frequently online, which led to high charges. Susan explained to her children that this was unacceptable and urged them to reduce their phone usage. Shortly after, Susan received a notification that Jennifer had spent an additional $200 on phone calls. Furious and already facing financial difficulties, Susan confronted Jennifer, who claimed that her paycheck had been delayed and that she intended to cover the costs herself. At that point, Susan decided to contact the restaurant where Jennifer worked to inquire about the delay in her daughter's pay. For the past month and a half, Jennifer had not shown up for work, so there was no paycheck for her. This shocked Susan, who realized that Jennifer had been dishonest. Instead of working, she had been spending time with her boyfriend. The next day, Susan at work, leaving David home alone, wandering around the courtyard of the house without clothes, which scared the neighbors. At that moment, Susan understood that she had lost control over her children and felt powerless to change things. To support the family, She had to work all the time. By the end of September, the situation had worsened. Jennifer decided to take advantage of her mother's constant work schedule. She started inviting Paul and Marilee over to the guest room, where her father used to live, spending time with them while Susan was away. When Susan was home, they acted like good guests, but as soon as she left, they behaved rudely. David was aware of everything but kept it a secret from Susan, supporting his sister and her friends. Eventually, they all grew tired of their parents' restrictions on their lives. This frustration led to a dangerous plan to kill Jennifer's mothers and Marilee's mothers, as well as Paul's parents. The trio became involved in various criminal ideas, including poisoning Susan with crushed prescription pills or arranging for her to be electrocuted in the bath. They also considered using a baseball bat, knives to cause serious injury. Paul even thought about shooting his father and stepmother, while Marilee planned to stab her mother while she slept. In the final phase of their plan, the teenagers intended to steal Susan's car, take their parents' money, and escape to Canada. On September 22, 2008, 14-year-old Marilee White had been missing for several days and had not answered her phone. Concerned, her mother reported her daughter as missing. Marilee's friends were also unable to contact her. Marilee's mother took action by distributing flyers with Marilee's photo and contacting the police. Fortunately, a patrol found Marilee wandering aimlessly on the outskirts of town and brought her home. During this time, Marilee revealed that Paul, a friend, had abandoned her. The police persuaded her not to run away again, and it appeared that she had calmed down. However, on the morning of September 23, 2008, Marilee's mother woke up feeling a strange presence. When she opened her eyes, she saw Marilee standing over her bed with a large kitchen knife. Instead of attacking, she reacted defensively as Marilee demanded the car keys to drive to the Bailey family's house. Marilee planned to gather others and escape to Canada. Although she reluctantly gave her the keys, she prevented Marilee from leaving. As soon as Marilee stepped outside, she called the police. Authorities intercepted Marilee and took her to a juvenile detention center. There, Marilee told her cellmate about a plan to kill their parents, but nobody took her seriously. At this time, Paul Henson waited for his father and stepmother to leave their trailer in the morning to go shopping. He broke into his father's room and took his .22 caliber handgun. He intended to shoot them when they returned, but they unexpectedly stopped at a movie theater and then went to visit friends, which delayed him return. Frustrated by the wait, Paul decided to leave and went back to Susan's house. That evening, Marilee was released from custody, and at the same time, Paul's parents reported him missing. The next day, September 24, David took a large knife with him to school. When the school administration learned about it, they issued a written warning to his mother. Susan put the warning on the refrigerator, but was too busy to address it right away. The following day, a police officer approached her to inform her about the search for Paul Henson, suggesting he might be at their house. Although she couldn't find him there, she noticed clear signs that he had been visiting frequently. The detective asked for permission to enter the house and talk to Jennifer, and she agreed. From the beginning, Jennifer seemed nervous. The detective knew about the teenager's deceptive plan and decided to ask Jennifer where Paul was. She said she hadn't seen her boyfriend since Saturday. The detective then requested to speak with her alone, but her mother, Susan, refused. Suspecting that Paul might be hiding in the house, the detective asked to search the premises, but Susan denied the request, stating that a warrant was needed. As a result, the detective left without any new information. The search for Paul continued, and another police officer arrived at the Bailey home. This time, Susan was informed that there were reports suggesting Paul might have a missing .22 caliber pistol from his father's trailer. Worried about safety, she reluctantly allowed the search, although she was not happy about it. During the search, they found several suspicious items, including a large butcher knife, hidden under a couch cushion in the living room. Since the knife did not belong to the Baileys, Susan accused Jennifer of planning to run away with Paul again. Jennifer explained that her friend might have accidentally left his knife at her house during his last visit, but this explanation did not convince Susan. Without waiting for the police to leave, Susan started arguing with her daughter again. Susan threatened to send her to live with her father or grandparents. During a search of Jennifer's room, they found evidence that she was packing her belongings. They also discovered several knives, which raised suspicions. However, since they couldn't find Paul's gun, the police left the house. Later, the mother found a box of ammunition hidden in one of the suitcases and became worried. She called the police again, requesting a more thorough search of her home. When they returned, the police took the ammunition but still did not find a gun. Instead, they found even more knives scattered around the house. In the trash, they found an empty bottle of antidepressants that belonged to Marilee. The Bailey family did not use such medications, but the police were unaware of this girl at the time and overlooked these concerning signs. Paul's father arrived at the house anxious about his son. He packed up Paul's belongings and left with everyone else. The following day, Susan struggled to find a way to resolve issues with her children, but nothing seemed to work. On September 25, she went to her regular job, followed by her second job, finally finishing around midnight. Throughout the day, Susan tried to contact her children, but both ignored her calls and messages. When she got home, she immediately sensed that something was off. The lights were off. Inside, she discovered the usual chaos left by her children. As she moved upstairs in the darkness, the house felt eerily quiet. As Susan climbed the stairs, someone suddenly grabbed her by the neck and covered her mouth with a cloth that had a chemical smell. Just then, Jennifer, Paul, and David stepped out of the shadows. They quickly slit Susan's throat and began stabbing her repeatedly with knives until she lay motionless on the floor within minutes. However, this horrific act was only part of their sinister plan. On September 26, Susan's mother received multiple calls from worried colleagues about Susan, as she had not shown up for her shifts that morning, a surprising behavior for someone who was known to be a workaholic. Susan's mother made several attempts to contact Susan, but was unsuccessful. Eventually, she reached out to the police department in Roanoke, Texas, asking them to check on the Bailey family's home. Over the next 2 days, patrol officers visited the house multiple times, but found no evidence that anyone was there. The lights were off, no cars were in the driveway, and all the doors and windows were closed. There were no signs of distress. It appeared as if the family had gone on vacation. Despite this, Susan's mother was deeply concerned that something might have gone wrong and urged the police to continue investigating. At 3:30 a.m. on September 28, 2008, a police officer in South Dakota spotted a suspicious vehicle parked near a closed gas station. He stopped to observe and noticed a teenager got out without turning on the headlights, did something briefly, then returned to the vehicle, and they all drove away. The officer decided to follow them. He saw that the car had Texas license plates, indicating they had traveled a long distance. However, it was unusual for teenagers to be out so late alone, making the situation seem very odd. The police officer pulled over the car and noticed a teenager driving. In the passenger seat was another minor, a girl, and in the back seat was a younger boy with a large dog. The car was stopped, and they were asked for identification, but none of them had any. The driver was 16-year-old Paul Henson. When the police officer checked his information, he discovered that Paul had been reported as a runaway and was also a suspect in a firearms case. The car belonged to Susan Bailey. Backup was requested, and they searched the stolen vehicle, but no gun was found. Jennifer's statements were inconsistent from the beginning. She appeared frightened and exhausted. Meanwhile, Texas police were alerted that the missing persons had been located. When Texas detectives heard this, they realized that Susan would never have allowed her children to travel that far without her. They suspected that something had happened to her and decided it was time to thoroughly investigate the Bailey home, especially after numerous requests from Susan's parents and colleagues. Upon entering the house, the detectives were immediately hit by a strong smell of decomposition. On the first floor, they found only a plate of pudding that had fallen on the floor. Forensic analysis later revealed that the pudding was laced with drugs. On the second floor, at the top of the stairs, they discovered Susan lying face down, blood everywhere. She had suffered 26 stab wounds and had been brutally beaten with a blunt object. The bathtub was filled with water, and an electric cord with exposed wires was hanging from the curtain plugged in. It appeared that someone had meticulously planned multiple methods to murder her. The smell of decomposition mixed with the smell of toiletries. A receipt found in the house confirmed that 13-year-old David had purchased these cleaning supplies at a local Walmart at the indicated time. In Jennifer's room, investigators found a diary in which she detailed plans for committing murder and starting a new life with Paul in Canada. They also uncovered additional evidence, including freshly cut hair belonging to Paul, clothing stained with Susan's blood, and DNA traces from Jennifer and David. It was clear that the teenagers had not effectively cleaned up the murder scene. The three suspects were detained in Texas, while a dog associated with them was taken to a shelter. The juvenile offenders quickly began to speak. Paul Henson accused David of the murder, claiming they all fled their town to protect the boy from the authorities. When detectives questioned David, he admitted to killing his mother and laughed. The detectives were taken aback. They did not expect such a response from a 13-year-old. Jennifer placed all the blame on Paul, insisting that she and her brother had done nothing wrong. The only person who avoided severe punishment was Marilee White, who was not in the car and had no evidence linking her to Susan's murder. However, she remained under police scrutiny for a long time and was questioned multiple times. Eventually, Marilee confirmed her friend's boyfriend's claims that they had planned to kill their families. She shared many details about their relationships. According to Marilee, Paul, Jennifer, and she had become very close. Paul enjoyed being intimate with both girls simultaneously, arguing that since he was dating Jennifer and had a separate relationship with Marilee, it wasn't cheating. The group engaged in occult practices, including cutting themselves and drinking each other's blood. Jennifer's plan was to kill all their parents, escape to Canada, and start their own commune. Because of her cooperation with the police, no charges were filed against Marilee. She was compelled to testify at the trial against the other conspirators. Based on her testimony, the prosecution believed that Jennifer ambushed her mother in a hallway on the second floor and attacked her with a bat, while Paul Henson came from behind and cut her throat. David also took part in the crime and inflicted superficial stab wounds on her body. Jennifer and Paul, despite being minors, were tried as adults for murder and each received a 60-year prison sentence. They will be eligible for parole starting in 2038. David was also tried as an adult for his involvement in the crime and was convicted of complicity, receiving a 26-year sentence. He will be eligible for release in 2034 when he turns 40. Following these events, Marilee White moved to a different state with her mother and changed her name. Her photo is kept confidential to protect her safety, as she was a young witness. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Amy Willard. Amy Ellen Willard was born on June 8, 1974, in Chester, Pennsylvania, a small town with a population of around 30,000. She is the youngest child in her family, with an older brother named Tim and a sister who was born a year prior. Paul Willard, their father, was a police officer who enforced strict discipline on his children to prepare them for life's hardships. He not only taught them self-defense but also placed a high value on safety. Their mother, Gail, worked as a nurse at a hospital. She understood the risks of carelessness and fully supported her husband's efforts to enhance security. Despite sharing similar views on life, Amy's parents divorced, leading to the disintegration of the family. Amy and her siblings stayed with their mother but would occasionally visit their father. During this period, Amy's older sister, Vera, became an important part of her life. Vera was an active member of her church and participated in various religious activities. The family members often supported one another in areas such as safety, helping others, and showing compassion, especially in light of the rising crime rate at that time. For this reason, their father taught the children self-defense lessons, while their mother taught them basic first aid skills. Amy began attending an all-girls high school where she was noted for her athletic talent. The school had championship teams in basketball, soccer, and cross-country. She participated in all three sports and had great success, especially in soccer. She also excelled in lacrosse and was named the captain of the basketball team. Her coach considered her one of the best athletes he had ever trained. In lacrosse, it was believed she had the potential to compete at the national level. After graduating, Amy enrolled at the University of George Mason, leaving her parents' home behind. While she played football at the university, she found her greatest success in lacrosse. She quickly attracted attention by breaking long-standing records and became a star player on a college team. Despite her achievements in sports and academics, she remained humble and a bit shy. In the summer of 1996, Amy was focused on her training as she prepared for the upcoming academic and sports season. She continued attending her classes regularly and participating in training sessions. At the same time, she sought a summer job to earn some extra money. She successfully balanced everything, which is why she visited her mother in June 1996 before going to the lake house to meet her friends at a bar. On the morning of June 20, 1996, around 2 a.m., an ambulance crew was driving on a highway toward Marple Township, Pennsylvania, when they spotted a Honda parked unusually on the roadside. Concerned, they decided to investigate the vehicle. They found that it was empty, the doors were wide open, the engine was running, and the headlights were on. The situation seemed strange, as if the owner had just stepped away but was expected to return. As they got closer to the car, they noticed blood nearby. Blood was seeping from the passenger area near the driver's door, forming a large pool. The ambulance team quickly contacted the police. Within minutes, forensic experts and detectives arrived to investigate the potential crime scene. They discovered a bloodied stone and a crowbar, which left a clear trail of bloodstains. The car itself showed no signs of damage, indicating that the driver could not have made a sudden stop. As they continued to search the area around the vehicle, they found even more blood, along with evidence of dragging. Initially, they thought the driver of the Honda might have struck someone, but this theory was soon dismissed. Nearby, investigators found tire tread marks from another vehicle. Unfortunately, rain began to fall, which could erase many of the remaining traces. Photographs of the scene were taken quickly. Search teams began scouring the surrounding area. Given the amount of blood, it was likely that there was a victim nearby, or even several victims. About a kilometer away from the abandoned car, investigators found sneakers and underwear, although it was unclear if they were connected to the case. A check of the car's license plate revealed that it belonged to a woman named Gail Willard. Unable to contact Gail, there were initial suspicions that she might be a victim of the attack. Reports indicated that Gail, a 40-year-old woman who worked as a nurse in the emergency room, was missing. However, the police later confirmed that she was not actually missing but was simply resting at her beach house in New Jersey, about an hour and a half away. She left for the beach house a few days earlier, on June 20th. When the police called the phone number she had left behind, they found that she was safe. Gail was, however, anxious about her car, which she had left with her 22-year-old daughter, Amy. Since Amy had not been in contact, Gail provided a detailed description of her to the authorities. They then reached out to Amy's father, Paul, who is a police sergeant in a nearby county. Gail went to the police station and stayed there for the rest of the day to assist with the investigation concerning her car. The car is new, but Gail discovered a large scratch on the rear bumper. This scratch appeared to have been caused by another vehicle or a heavy object colliding with it, which made her feel suspicious. Gail spoke with the police, providing them with details about her daughter. Amy had been living outside of Pennsylvania but returned for the summer holidays. She planned to meet old friends on June 19, 1996, for a reunion with former classmates who were now attending different schools. They intended to gather at a popular bar among youth and students, Smoky Joe's. Gail shared the contact numbers of the friends who would be with her daughter that evening. The detectives visited the bar to interview the staff, but everyone there had difficulty remembering Amy. With many customers visiting daily, it was difficult for them to recall any specific person. Amy's friends confirmed that they had indeed been at Smoky Joe's, sitting in a corner, drinking and dancing. Since Amy had an important class at 8 the next morning, she decided to leave at 1:30 a.m. to get some rest. The rest of the group stayed behind and continued to enjoy their night. They had no idea what might have happened to Amy and didn't notice anything unusual. However, they did provide detectives with a description of her outfit. One notable detail was her t-shirt, which featured a large sunflower. This information became a key clue. From that point, a description of Amy was circulated across all media to gather more leads. Alarmed headlines began to surface in newspapers and on TV, sparking interest from the local community. Unfortunately, all appeals for information ended up being fruitless. The search continued around the bar, and police questioned witnesses to find any CCTV footage. Unfortunately, there were no cameras in the area, so this did not lead to any useful information. However, the discovery of underwear and sneakers led Gail, Amy's mother, to confirm that they belonged to her daughter without a doubt. This development increased the urgency of the situation. The police issued another public appeal to encourage potential witnesses to come forward. On the same day, a 20-year-old man named Andrew Kobach approached the police. He reported seeing an abandoned car that matched the description of Gail's Honda around 1 o'clock in the morning. He provided a detailed account of the circumstances, but his timing was questioned. The police suspected he might have misjudged the time, possibly not checking his watch or estimating it incorrectly. Nevertheless, this report made him a suspect. Detectives wondered why he hadn't alerted the police sooner if he noticed something unusual. Andrew could potentially be connected to Amy's disappearance since he was in the same area. He denied any involvement, stating he was working at a nearby bar called Smoky Joe's. With no other leads available, detectives considered the possibility that he had contacted the police to gauge the investigation's progress and mislead them. Andrew lived just 10 minutes away from the bar and came from a wealthy family, known for getting into trouble. He had a record of traffic violations and was arrested in 1994 for falsely reporting a fire, although the charges were later dropped. Friends claimed he had an obsessive desire to become a firefighter, which some found concerning. At around 5 p.m. on June 20th, in an empty lot in North Philadelphia, a group of children was walking when a boy in the group made a horrifying discovery while crossing the train tracks. They discovered the body of a girl lying in a fetal position, naked and concealed inside 2 large garbage bags. The children quickly informed nearby adults, who then called the police. When law enforcement arrived, it was clear that the girl had been murdered. A search of the surrounding area yielded no leads. Her identity was unknown, as the condition of her head made it difficult to check dental records. The only notable clue was a tattoo on her ankle. Detectives compiled a list of missing girls from the area and contacted their families for identification. That same evening, Gail recognized her daughter. Forensic experts confirmed the investigators' initial thoughts: the girl had been killed. Her skull was fractured, which caused severe bleeding and ultimately led to a stroke. The rapid blood loss meant her heart stopped within minutes. The violence inflicted on her was brutal. There were marks from shoe soles on her head, suggesting that the attacker had stomped on her. Additionally, there were numerous bruises across her body, along with defensive wounds and some unusual marks that could not be identified. Furthermore, Amy had been abused multiple times, potentially with a branch or another object of torture found nearby. There were no signs of blood or struggle at the scene, indicating that she was likely transported there after the crime was committed elsewhere. When the search team discovered her shoes and underwear, they were clean and dry. Detectives believe that the assailant returned to the area after Amy's death, scattering items to obscure evidence and mislead the investigation. During Amy's autopsy, traces of male biological fluid were found, which supports the suspicion of abuse. This evidence was collected and sent to a forensic lab to create a DNA profile. At that time, the technology was slower, so the results took weeks or even months to obtain. Meanwhile, the police continued searching for additional evidence. When the results of the initial tests arrived, it was confirmed that the blood found near the abandoned car belonged to Amy. Additionally, the items collected from the scene were also confirmed to be associated with her. The detectives then shifted their focus to the tire tread patterns found near Amy's car, hoping to identify the vehicle used by the perpetrator. An analysis of the photographs revealed the make and model of the tires, which are typically found on small cars. Unfortunately, this information was not enough to significantly narrow down the list of suspects, as no one in Amy's immediate circle drove such vehicles. The detectives examined the evidence from the crime scene and concluded that Amy had resisted fiercely. Her high athletic skills and the self-defense lessons taught by her father may have helped her escape the attack and move further at the scene. However, she may have lost consciousness due to blood loss. The attacker ambushed her in the area where her underwear and shoes were later discovered. It was unclear why she stopped at such a secluded spot. Gail's car was in perfect working condition, ruling out a breakdown as the reason for her stopping. Her father, a policeman, had repeatedly warned her about criminals who pose as victims on remote roads, hoping someone will stop to help. Given the dangerous nature of the area, Amy should have remembered this advice and avoided stopping. Investigators believe that Gail's car, Amy's mother's car, may have been struck while she was driving, forcing her to pull over. This led them to focus more on Andrew Kobach, who claimed he had seen an abandoned Honda. Detectives visited Andrew's neighborhood to gather more information about him. They discovered that he had worked at a company just a kilometer away from where the incident occurred shortly before the attack on Amy. Suspicion towards Andrew intensified after authorities spoke with a woman named Susan Sieber. Susan was Andrew's neighbor and a witness who noted that his interest in the fire service seemed more like an obsession than a career choice. He even used a police scanner and had installed flashing lights on his car. He even goes so far as to chase after fire trucks while they are on duty, which is quite strange. He also had a habit of parking his car in Susan's driveway, even though her house was across the street. When Susan became frustrated with this, she confronted him. However, to her surprise, the following day, the fire brigade was called to her address. The incident seems quite complicated, however, it was quickly resolved, possibly due to the connections and wealth of Andrew's father, who is very rich. Andrew only earns a temporary income, working at bars or clubs. Notably, during the time Amy was murdered, he was unemployed. Clearly, Andrew lied when he claimed he was working at a bar near Smokey Joe. But why would he do that if there was no suspicious reason? Detectives intended to hold Andrew accountable, but they needed more evidence. Friends described him as a lonely and introverted person. He is a nice guy, but very few people understand him because he doesn't socialize with others. Within his family, he is viewed as a failure. He has two older brothers. One is studying medicine and is quite successful, while the other works as a broker like their father. The blue and red lights flashing on his car at night gave him the opportunity to pose as a police officer. Authorities believe they have discovered how the murderer controlled the girl. They invited Andrew to the station for questioning, and he initially cooperated, even allowing detectives to search his car without a warrant. However, when detectives found very dirty handcuffs in the trunk, Andrew suddenly refused to answer more questions and requested a lawyer. This prompted the authorities to consider obtaining multiple warrants to continue searching both his car and his home. On June 25, 1996, they arrived at the Andrew family's house, waiting for a warrant to collect DNA samples. The news that the son of a wealthy broker was suspected in the brutal murder of a girl became a top story in the media. The car was sent to the forensic lab, but issues quickly arose. The tires did not match the model that forensic scientists had identified, and Andrew's DNA did not match any evidence found. Although Andrew appeared to be the prime suspect, investigators had to eliminate him from the list of suspects. The theory that the killer might have impersonated a police officer also hit a dead end. The community was alarmed and demanded that the killer be caught, with some suggesting that the perpetrator could be an actual law enforcement officer. Consequently, a search was conducted to identify potential wolves in uniform. However, this line of inquiry also did not yield results. The public outcry grew to the point that new regulations were needed to prohibit police officers from stopping vehicles without displaying their badges. On September 23, 1996, a woman visited the police station to report an assault she had experienced on the same highway. While she was driving, two men wearing ski masks suddenly opened her car door, forced her into the back seat, and abused her. They had also chased her car before the attack, and while there were two attackers, the driver did not exit the vehicle during the incident. Detectives decided that this was likely a copycat crime unrelated to Amy's murder, as they had left her alive. They were eventually caught, but they were not linked to Amy's murder. In an effort to find clues, detectives reviewed the timeline of crimes and discovered a similar incident from 1994. In that case, a random driver used a flashing light on his car to stop a motorist and asked for her driver's license. When she questioned why he wasn't in a police uniform, he struck her in the face and tried to pull her from the car. Luckily, the victim managed to fight back and escape, and she reported the incident to the police. Unfortunately, the attacker was never identified or caught. Detectives even appeared on a television show about various crime cases, which led to many new clues. Unfortunately, they all proved to be false leads. By 1997, the police still had no answers. In May of that year, another alarming incident occurred. A student named Patty Jordan was enjoying time with friends at a bar and left alone after midnight. The next day, she shared a chilling experience, explaining that she noticed a car following her from the bar. The driver was speeding, which seemed suspicious. Despite her efforts to escape by breaking traffic laws, she couldn't shake the pursuit. When she slowed down, she felt the car hit her from behind. Terrified, Patty continued to drive, but when she stopped at a traffic light, the driver gestured for her to pull over. Instead of stopping, she accelerated, but the pursuing car overtook her and blocked her path. By some stroke of luck, she managed to escape and immediately went to the local police station to report the incident, providing the detectives with details, including the car's license plate and a description of the driver. The police checked the license plate and discovered that a 38-year-old man named Arthur Bomer had purchased the car with that license plate. When Patty was shown a photo of him, she recognized him as her stalker. She had seen him closely when he approached her car. A search of his records revealed that Arthur had a lengthy criminal history. Notably, he had committed murder in Nevada on July 25, 1977, when he was only 19. This crime originated from a dispute over a parking space, during which he attacked an innocent man. He was sentenced to life in prison but was released after just 11 years due to a reform. Arthur was released in 1990 and subsequently moved to Pennsylvania. A few months later, he stopped a random woman on the road, dragged her out of her car, and assaulted her. He should have returned to prison for violating his early release terms, but a strange coincidence prevented this. The woman died in an unrelated incident and could not testify against him in court, leading to the case being closed. On June 5, 1997, a woman called the police to report that an unknown intruder was attempting to break into her apartment. When the police arrived, they apprehended the man, who claimed to be Peter Thomas Love. However, fingerprint analysis revealed his true identity as Arthur Bomer. He was arrested for trespassing and illegal entry. A car near the location matched the description provided by a previous victim, Patty Jordan, but it had a license plate that belonged to another vehicle. This Ford was taken to the police station for questioning. Arthur became a suspect in the case of Amy. When investigators mentioned Amy's name, He refused to discuss anything related to the death penalty. The police took this as a confession to Amy's murder. Further investigation revealed that the Honda he was using, which had stolen license plates, belonged to Maria Cabuenos, a young woman who had been missing for 3 years. Marks on the bumper of Arthur's Honda resembled a collision with another car, matching scratches found on Amy's vehicle. Additionally, blood stains were discovered in the trunk. All evidence was collected and sent for examination. Arthur became the main suspect in the murder of Amy and the disappearance of Maria. He denied any wrongdoing and expressed his frustration to the media about being accused. His wife reported that he had been absent from home for 2 days starting June 19th. Arthur's brother mentioned that they often visited Smokey Joe's bar together. Arthur had a tendency to inappropriately approach women, sometimes spilling a drink or bumping into cars in parking lots just to initiate a conversation. Later, Arthur's mistress, Mary, came to the police station. She claimed that on June 19th, Arthur returned to her and recounted an attack he had experienced. He had pretended to be a police officer, but Mary realized he was lying. When he attacked the victim with a crowbar, he took her to a secluded area to hide the evidence. However, the police questioned Mary's credibility because her account closely mirrored news reports and didn't offer any new information. It seemed she might have ulterior motives for accusing him, as she later confessed to feeling upset after discovering he was married. Detectives collected evidence for the investigation and awaited a match with the existing DNA profile associated with the case. They concentrated on locating a Ford vehicle that had Honda license plate. Eventually, they discovered it in a landfill. Although the car was nearly corroded beyond recognition, investigators found traces of blood and other evidence indicating that the suspect had transported his victim in it. Remarkably, the blood found in the car belonged to Maria, and similar traces were found in Amy's vehicle. Arthur's connection to both crimes was further solidified when it was confirmed that the male bodily fluids found on Amy matched those of Arthur. On December 10, 1997, he was charged with first-degree murder and abuse while in custody before his trial. He attempted to end his life using a bedsheet, but the fabric tore under his weight. Arthur's trial was set for September 1998. After reviewing the prosecution's evidence and the defense's arguments, the jury began to deliberate. On October 1, 1998, Arthur Bomer was found guilty of Amy's murder. His attorney attempted to lessen the sentence, but the court determined that the death penalty was warranted. 3 months after his execution in January 1999, a man walking his dog in a field in Philadelphia discovered a human skull and reported it to the authorities. Forensic examination confirmed that the skull belonged to the missing Maria Cabuenos. Her body was located 20 kilometers from Arthur's residence, and the cause of her death was identified as blunt force trauma to the head. Detectives believe Arthur was responsible for her murder, as all evidence pointed to him. However, since he had already been executed, there was no opportunity to present the findings, and the case was officially closed. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of the DeFeo family. To truly understand it all, let's first get to know the DeFeo family, who once lived in a house at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, Long Island, New York. Ronald Joseph DeFeo Sr., more commonly known as Big Ronnie, was born on November 16, 1930, to parents Rocco and Antoinette DeFeo. When he was younger, Big Ronnie was slender, handsome, and had a powerful gaze reminiscent of the legendary Rudolph Valentino. With his suave looks, he attracted the attention of Louise Marie DeFeo, who was born on November 3, 1931, to Michael John Briganti Jr. and Angelina Maria Briganti. Louise had aspirations of becoming a model. She was beautiful enough to mingle with the best, including the famous singer Mel Torme. After a brief courtship, Big Ronnie and Louise married. However, the Briganti family disapproved of Big Ronnie, cutting all ties with the newlyweds until September 26, 1951, when their son Ronald DeFeo Jr. was born. He would later be known as Butch. Growing up, Butch faced many struggles as the firstborn son. His father expected a lot from him, and Big Ronnie was not afraid to discipline Butch in harsh ways. One minute he would hug his son, and the next he would throw him across the room. Louise's brother, Michael John Briganti Jr., would later testify at the DeFeo trial about an incident he witnessed when Butch was only 2 years old. He recalled, "They were all sitting down in the basement watching TV, and he don't know what the boy had done, but all of a sudden, the father just pushed the boy into the wall. The boy banged his head or part of his shoulder or something." As a child, Butch was extremely overweight, a problem that would persist until his late teenage years when he began using amphetamines. His school life suffered as a result, with bigger kids often teasing him and calling him names like the Blob, Bucky Beaver, and Pork Chop. On July 29, 1956, Louise gave birth to a daughter, Dawn Teresa DeFeo. A few years later, on August 16, 1961, Louise gave birth to Allison Louise, and then again on September 4, 1962, to Mark Gregory. Sometime after Mark's birth, Louise decided to leave her husband for reasons that remain unclear. To win her back, Big Ronnie determination to express his love. On October 24, 1965, Big Ronnie was blessed with a third son, John Matthew. By this time, the family had moved from their Brooklyn apartment to a lavish home on the south shore of Long Island in the affluent community of Amityville. Many wondered how Big Ronnie, working as a car dealer service manager, could afford such a luxurious home. The answer was clear: his father-in-law, Michael John Briganti Sr. In the early 1970s, Big Ronnie decided he wanted life-sized portraits to immortalize his family. Michael Jr. picked up the tab, which was estimated to be at least $50,000. The painstakingly detailed portraits took over a year to complete, and when finished, they hung in large golden frames on the staircase wall between the first and second floors of the DeFeo home. By this point, Butch had become increasingly troublesome as he got older. The DeFeos owned an auto body shop where Butch worked, but he spent more time at bars than actually working. His growing addiction to banned substance and alcohol only made things worse, driving him to violence against his own family. There was even an incident where he pulled a gun on his father, and countless other times he lashed out physically at those closest to him. Then, in the early hours of November 13, 1974, Butch completely snapped. Armed with a rifle, he moved silently through the house, murdering his family members one by one as they slept. What's truly chilling about this is that, despite the brutal killings taking place within just 15 minutes, the bodies showed no signs of struggle. Even more bizarre, the sound of gunshots didn't wake any of the other family members, or at least didn't rouse them from their beds. The bodies were found all face down on their beds, almost as if they had been carefully placed that way. To add to the eerie nature of the crime, the rifle had no silencer, yet aside from the family dog barking, none of the neighbors reported hearing a single gunshot that night. After committing the horrific murders, Butch calmly took a bath, got dressed for work, and then reported the crime, claiming he discovered the gruesome scene after returning home. He even suggested that a mafia hitman, Louis Fellini, along with 2 accomplices, was responsible. However, a police interview soon revealed serious inconsistencies in his story. The next day, Butch admitted to carrying out the murders himself. Fellini, the supposed hitman, had an airtight alibi, proving he was out of state at the time of the killings. DeFeo confessed, saying, once he started, he just couldn't stop. It went so fast. He went on to explain how he took a bath, changed his clothes, and carefully disposed of key evidence, including his blood-stained clothes, the Marlin rifle, and cartridges, before going to work as if nothing had happened. It was claimed that Butch had been hearing voices that urged him to commit the murders. However, the prosecution brought in a psychiatrist. According to the psychiatrist, Butch wasn't hearing voices or possessed by another personality. He simply didn't see anything wrong with killing his family. Because of that, DeFeo was convicted on 6 counts of murder and sentenced to 6 consecutive life terms, which he continued to serve at the Sullivan Correctional Facility in New York until he died on March 12, 2021. Just over a year after the tragic deaths of the DeFeo family, the home on Ocean Boulevard was sold to the Lutz family, who would soon unknowingly step into a new chapter of horror. The Amityville home, marked by its horrific past, raises the question of whether the tragic events left behind some lingering eerie energy haunting the land where it all unfolded. However, the Lutz family wouldn't have to wonder for long. They would soon share their own unsettling experiences in the home. Although the price was a bit higher than their budget of $30,000 to $50,000, something about the house pulled them in. It was a beautiful colonial-style home with 6 bedrooms, a heated pool, and a boathouse sitting right on the Amityville River. Don't think for a second that the Lutz family wasn't aware of the horrific murders that had taken place there. In fact, they knew all about the house's dark past. But despite that, the Lutzes fell in love with the property and decided it was meant to be theirs. They bought the house for a bargain price of $80,000, never once thinking it was unlivable because of its tragic history. However, what was supposed to be their dream home soon turned into a waking nightmare. The strange and terrifying events that followed were later shared with the world by author J. Anson in his famous book, The Amityville Horror. Before moving into the house, George Lutz was a successful businessman, but after settling in new house, something changed. He became sluggish, cold, and irritable. Most bizarre of all, he started waking up at 3:15 in the morning every night, unable to get back to sleep. It wasn't just random, it was the exact time the DeFeo murders had occurred. One night, George was startled to see his 5-year-old daughter, Missy, standing by her bedroom window. But what sent chills down his spine was the eerie outline of a pig's face with glowing red eyes staring at him from behind her. He rushed into her room, only to find Missy sound asleep, as if nothing had happened. Not long after, Missy talked about a new friend, an imaginary pig named Jody. But was Jody really imaginary? In another bone-chilling moment, George looked at his wife Kathy as she lay sleeping, but something was horribly wrong. Her face had distorted and aged, as if she'd become a 90-year-old woman overnight. At times, Kathy seemed to undergo strange transformations, aging rapidly and looking like someone else entirely. Her mother even witnessed this unnatural change firsthand. But the strange events didn't stop there. The house seemed to have a mind of its own. Doors were ripped off their hinges, and in the middle of a freezing winter, a room was suddenly filled with flies. Outside, cloven hoofprints appeared in the snow, right near their doorstep. Inside, green slime started to ooze down the walls, and then in the basement, they discovered a hidden room that didn't appear on any of the house's original blueprints. The room was painted a deep, unsettling red and was only large enough for 2 people to sit close together. But what was even more disturbing was the faint rancid odor that lingered in the room, adding to the overwhelming sense of dread that hung in the air. George even tried bringing their family dog into the mysterious basement room, but the animal refused to step inside. The usually dog backed away, tail tucked, and whimpered in fear. It was the first time George had ever seen the dog so terrified, as if it sensed something lurking in the shadows, something invisible to human eyes but deeply unsettling to an animal's instincts. The eerie experiences didn't stop there. One night, George was jolted awake by the unmistakable sound of a band playing downstairs. The lively music echoed through the house as if an invisible group was holding a late-night gathering. Confused and unnerved, he made his way to the living room to investigate, but the moment he stepped inside, everything went silent. No music, no people, nothing. Yet something had definitely been there. The rug had been rolled up, and the furniture had been shifted, as if a dance floor had been cleared for a ghostly celebration. Desperate for help, the Lutz family reached out to a priest, hoping for some kind of blessing or relief from the terrifying events. However, the moment the priest stepped into the house, things took a dark turn. He was overwhelmed by a sudden intense sickness and began to experience his own set of unexplained disturbances. Some force seemed to be warning him to stay away. The impact of these events reached far beyond the Lutz family. Author J. Anson recalled how meeting the priest convinced him that this was more than just a story, it was real. From there, he started to create the book. On January 14, 1976, after just 28 days of living in what they thought would be their dream home, the Lutz family experienced a night so terrifying that they made a split-second decision. They packed a few bags, left everything else behind, and fled, never to return. According to a 2005 interview with George Lutz, he emphasized that their departure wasn't planned. They didn't wake up that morning thinking they were leaving for good. This was their home. When they left, they didn't know they wouldn't be coming back. They didn't know that everything they left behind they would never see again. Their abandoned belongings, untouched and frozen in time, were later set to be auctioned off. The house that had once seemed like a fresh start had turned into something they could never return to. Determined to share their horrifying experience, the Lutz family recounted every chilling detail to writer Anson. He would go on to transform their story into the instant bestseller in 1977. The book gripped the public, with the Los Angeles Times calling it both fascinating and frightening. Some critics believed its success wasn't just about ghosts and haunted houses. They argued that the story resonated with people because of the unstable political and economic climate in the United States at the time. Rampant inflation, rising interest rates, a crippling oil shortage had left the country anxious and uneasy. As the story unfolds, it becomes clear that the horrors inside the Amityville house weren't the only ones haunting the Lutz family. Their business was struggling due to the failing economy, and at the worst possible time, the IRS launched an investigation into their taxes. For many readers in the late 70s, this felt all too real, paranormal or not. Financial stress and uncertainty were things they knew all too well. By blending supernatural terror with real, life struggles, the Amityville horror struck a nerve with the American public. It wasn't just a ghost story, it was a reflection of the fears people were living with every day. Some critics even argued that the book cleverly capitalized on popular horror trends of the time, the trope of a once-loving father turning violent and unrecognizable. When asked if he had experienced anything strange while writing the book, Anson quickly dismissed the idea, replying, "No, however, he did suffer a heart attack soon after finishing it, though he insisted it was due to his smoking and unhealthy lifestyle rather than anything paranormal." But while Anson shrugged off any supernatural connection, eerie incidents followed those who got too close to the story. Several people who handled early copies of the manuscript reportedly had fatal encounters. One of Anson's friends had a fire break out in his car while driving the manuscript back to the publisher. Another friend and his son nearly drowned when their car plunged into the water, but when rescuers opened the trunk, the manuscript inside was mysteriously dry, despite being stored in a simple clasped envelope. In the most chilling case, a woman who had been given the first 2 chapters to read died in a house fire the very night she received them, and among the charred remains of her home, the pages of the manuscript were found completely untouched. The terrifying tale of the Lutz family has since been adapted into several films, with the most famous being the 1979 version starring James Brolin. In 2005, the Amityville Horror returned to the big screen with Ryan Reynolds stepping into the role of George Lutz, following in the footsteps of James Brolin. Both movies stayed true to the eerie backstory of the infamous house where a gruesome mass murder had taken place, but they each took creative liberties to crank up the terror. Then there's how the house itself is portrayed. The older film leans into the idea that the house is a sinister entity influencing Ronald DeFeo Jr. to kill his family in 1974, while the remake shifts the horror to the ghosts of the victims, making them the primary source of terror. The priest who tried to help the Lutz family also meets different fates depending on the version. In the book, he hears a voice commanding him to get out and later becomes ill, eventually giving up on helping the family. The films, however, escalate the horror, showing him being attacked by swarms of supernatural flies and even going blind. Regardless of these differences, one chilling fact remains: an entire family was murdered in that house. Yet despite the Lutz family's claims of paranormal experiences in 1975, no other owners have reported hauntings since. According to the Washington Post and real estate firm Coldwell Banker, Harbor Light, 4 different families have lived in the house after the Lutzes. A previous owner even had the address changed to avoid unwanted attention. The last time the house went up for sale was in the summer of 2016, and it was sold in February 2017 for just over $600,000, significantly less than the $950,000 it was purchased for in 2010. As for the real murders that took place, while Butch was eventually found dead in his prison cell, there are countless versions of events and interviews he gave before his death. In an interview from 1986, Butch claimed that his sister Dawn killed their father and that their mother killed his siblings before he killed her. He later filed a motion in 1990 stating that Dawn and an unknown assailant were the real killers, that he only shot Dawn by accident during a struggle. Despite his shifting stories, his claims were always met with skepticism. In 2000, he spoke with author R.I. Auna, asserting that his parents plotted to kill him, which led him to join forces with Dawn and others in desperation. Butch's narrative continued to evolve, becoming increasingly distant with details about the events and unreliable witnesses. His claims, including involvement from his wife Geraldine Gates, only deepened the mystery, with authorities and experts disproving many of his assertions. Now, it's easy to lean toward the idea that Butch was simply a psychopath driven by childhood trauma or addiction, who saw no problem in killing his family. However, if the lingering souls of his victims did haunt the Lutz family, we can only hope they found justice and peace. The saga of the DeFeo family in the house at 112 Ocean Avenue remains one of the most haunting and enigmatic chapters in American crime and lore. From Ronald Butch's cold-blooded slaughter of his family in 1974 to the Lutz family's harrowing 28-day ordeal a year later, the Amityville horror transcends a mere murder case, weaving a tapestry of trauma, mystery, and supernatural intrigue. Butch's shifting confessions and unrepentant nature leave us questioning whether his actions stem from a fractured mind or something darker, while the Lutz's flight from inexplicable terror suggests the house itself may hold echoes of its violent past. Decades later, with Butch gone and the house standing quietly under new ownership, its legacy endures, immortalized in books and films, yet shrouded in doubt. Whether driven by human evil or lingering spirits, the tragedy of Amityville serves as a chilling reminder of the shadows that can lurk within families and homes, leaving us to wonder where the line between reality and nightmare truly lies. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Mary Stauffer. Mary was born in West Duluth, Minnesota, USA, and her family moved to the neighboring town of Hummontown when she was 10 years old. She had 3 siblings, all of whom graduated from a local school and planned to go to college. Mary attended college and graduated in 1965. She loved working with children and dreamed of teaching, a dream that came true when she got a job at a school. She is a math teacher. In her personal life, everything was also successful. She married a seminary graduate, Irv Stauffer. They were devout Baptists. They first went to the Philippines as missionaries in 1967, and the trip was successful. Mary taught in Minneapolis for a couple of years. Then they moved to Polk, Nebraska, where her husband was asked to become the pastor of a congregation. They dedicated themselves to serving the church there, where both of their children were born. In 1975, they returned to the Philippines to undertake a 4-year mission trip. There, they planted new churches on the islands and returned home to Minnesota in 1979. Mary was planning to go to the Philippines again, this time intending to take her children with her. A few days before the family was to leave for the Philippines, while they were in the suburbs of St. Paul, they were destined to meet a person who would turn their lives upside down. On May 16, 1980, the day began normally for 8-year-old Elizabeth and her mother, Mary. They arrived and parked near a hair salon on Cleveland Avenue. When they left the salon, they headed to their car. Mary immediately noticed a young man, who looked to be about 30, confidently approaching them from the direction of a busy intersection. He looked at them strangely, and Mary instinctively felt uncomfortable under his gaze, but she did not panic since they were in a busy area. This young man did not look particularly dangerous. He stood out because of his thick glasses. Mary assumed he was merely asking for directions or something similar. However, when he approached the car, he took a gun from his belt, placed it next to the hood, and demanded a ride. In horror, Mary was ready to give up the keys to the car that the church had given them if only he would let them go. But the criminal did not want the keys. He forced Mary and her daughter to sit in the front, demanded that she drive north. Mary tried to influence the attacker, calm him down, and persuade him to let them go. She convinced him that if there were any problems, he could turn to the church, which would not abandon its parishioners in trouble. Mary stoically remained calm, trying to soothe the kidnapper and even bribing him. However, all her efforts were in vain. She even turned to the Bible, but the kidnapper was clearly not ready to listen to the Holy Scriptures. He ordered them to be quiet and keep driving. When they stopped at the nearest intersection, a patrolman pulled up next to their car. The kidnapper threatened to kill Elizabeth if they went in the same direction as the policeman or gave him a signal. Mary was forced to change their route, and the kidnapper noticeably relaxed. They drove to a wooded area in Anoka, stopping at a deserted camping site. There, the attacker ordered them out of the car and deeper into the vegetation, cautiously looking around. He forced them into the trunk, tied the mother and daughter together, taped their mouths shut. He then got behind the wheel and drove into the countryside. There, he planned to pick up a spare tire for his van, placing it in a trunk right on top of the captives. At that moment, two neighborhood boys became curious about what was happening and came dangerously close. One stood in front of the car while the other, named Jason Wilkman, approached the trunk from behind. The little boy curiously looked at the wheel and seemed to notice something underneath it. The kidnappers saw Jason and panicked. Without thinking twice, he grabbed Jason and threw him into the trunk with the others. When Jason's friends saw what had happened, he immediately ran home to tell his family. The kidnapper chased after him but was too far behind to catch up. In a panic, he jumped behind the wheel and took off. Jason was crying, and Mary tried to talk to him, but he was too scared, could only tell her his name and age. She tried to calm the children down, and it worked. At least they stopped crying. The trip was short, but Mary heard them moving around in the rough terrain. Branches and bushes constantly hit the vehicle as the criminal drove deep into the forest for several kilometers. Here, he pulled Jason out of the trunk and took him away. A few minutes later, he returned alone, did not open the trunk, but simply got behind the wheel and drove away. Mary prayed that he would just let the innocent child go because she did not hear any shots, but gloomy thoughts crept into her mind. Mary's car was left in the bushes. It was hard to see because he was increasing the distance from the police. The kidnapper got into a black van without windows, along with Mary and her daughter. Before driving off, he double-checked the ropes on his captives, then returned to the city and took them to his electronics store, where he allowed them to use the toilet and gave them juice to drink. They stretched their limbs, which had gone numb. Mary tried to find out what he wanted, but instead of answering, he taped both their mouths shut again, tied them up, put them back in the van, and drove them to his family's house in a neighboring town. The small house was only 10 kilometers from the apartment where the Stauffer lived with their children. Nevertheless, Mary and daughter did not know where they were. They were mistaken while he wandered through many places. The criminal took both of them to the bedroom of the house, which was small, dark, and cramped. He removed the door handle and locked the door. Getting used to the darkness and looking around, Mary and her daughter realized they were in a kind of storage room filled with clothes, toys, but there was nothing that could help them. At the same time, Mary's husband, Irv, and her son, Steve, were waiting for the return of the mother and daughter from the beauty salon. They had a family dinner planned, and the last preparations were to be made before leaving. Both should have returned long ago, which began to worry the household. At 4:30 p.m., Irv called the salon, and the hairdresser confirmed that the visitors had left long ago but had no idea where they were going or what could have happened. Irv called his wife's friends, but they did not know where she might be. Then he turned to other members of the Baptist community and involved them in the search. They all called local hospitals, acquaintances, police stations, and even morgues to find the missing. When no information could be obtained, Irv contacted the police. However, from the very beginning, it was obvious that they suspected of himself of the disappearance of his wife. By that night, the authorities were already engaged in the search for a 6-year-old boy, Jason Wilkman. The search for Mary continued. Irv explained that he was not involved in the disappearance of his wife and daughter. He and his son were waiting for them at home and had no idea what happened after they left the hairdresser. But the authorities did not believe him and suspected he had done something to them. The next morning, a car was found. They even managed to find 2 sets of fingerprints on the steering wheel, but their owners were not in the police database. The car had no license plate, so investigators could not determine whose car it was. The area around the car began to be thoroughly searched. First of all, they found the car's license plate. It had been torn off when the criminal escaped through the bushes. Suspicions arose that Jason's abduction and the disappearance of Mary and her child could be connected. This helped them know that the car belonged to Mary. It seemed that everything was very serious, and the missing persons were in danger. About 300 police officers and volunteers were gathered to begin the search operation. Announcements were published featuring images of the missing. Based on the words of the boy's friend, a composite sketch of the kidnapper was created. From that moment on, the authorities' suspicions regarding Mary's husband only intensified. Ironically, the composite sketch bore a striking resemblance to him. Both he and the kidnapper were dark-haired, wore glasses. Burr became the main suspect in the disappearance of the two children and Mary. However, Burr provided an alibi supported by a photo and passed a lie detector test. His fingerprints did not match those found in the car, yet the authorities still did not want to clear him as a suspect. Burr continued to emphasize his innocence and pointed out that the investigation's misconceptions were leading them away from the real goals of the search operation. Before her first trip to the Philippines, Mary had taught at the school, and among her 9th grade students was Ming Sun Shiu, a teenager of Taiwanese-American descent, with whom Mary had a good relationship. He showed great promise in sports and also had significant academic success. It seemed that the teenager had a great future ahead of him. Later, former students of Mary said that Ming was enamored with his math teacher. He thought she seemed smart and stately. After Mary went to the Philippines, she returned and moved to another city. Ming became truly obsessed with his teacher and constantly remembered her. He began to pursue his secret love, and it looked radical. Confusing the younger of Stauffer with his father, also named Irv, Ming showed up at Mary's in-laws house in Duluth on the 4th of July and held Irv Sr. at gunpoint. Ming took him into the house and told him to call his wife to the room. When Mary's mother-in-law entered, Ming realized his mistake. Ming claimed he was simply mistaken and threatened that if they went to the police, he would return and shoot them both, and then he ran away. The elderly couple had no idea that Ming was really interested in the younger Irv. They never reported it anywhere and didn't even tell the mayor and his son about the incident until they returned from the Philippines in 1979. No one had any idea who could have attacked the families. Neither the motive nor the goals were known. Mary only found out that the attack was carried out by Ming when he had already taken her and her daughter prisoner. He proudly told her about it before attacking her. Mary had no idea that he had been spying on the family from the forest, which was located not far from the house where they settled. Probably, he decided to attack because he saw preparations for departure and understood that soon they could leave again for a long time. Shortly before the kidnapping, Ming even tried to get through the doors of the patio, but nothing came of it. Later, he attempted to get through the storage room and drilled several holes. Burr found sawdust and removed it, but he still did not understand the relevance of their appearance. Now everything fell into place. In the meantime, the captives experienced the hospitality of the criminal. Immediately after the kidnapping, Ming admitted that Mary was lucky that her family was not nearby during the surprise attack, as he was ready to do anything to take her, even kill everyone. The next day after the kidnapping, he pulled Mary out of the closet, spread a blanket on the floor in the living room, tied her up. After that, he made a 3-hour video interview in which he revealed his identity. Mary remembered Ming when he spoke about math lessons at school. He reminded her that he was the student she had failed in exams. Mary immediately recalled who he was but could not understand what he meant. He told her that he couldn't get an academic scholarship because of her, as his parents had died, and he couldn't afford to go to college because of that. After losing his place in school, he was drafted into the Vietnam War, which led him to a prison camp where he experienced some tough times. He blamed Mary for all of this. Now, he wanted to make her pay. There was one flaw in this tragic story: Ming had made it all up. Mary remembered perfectly well that he graduated from high school with excellent marks, so he could easily have received a scholarship to any college. In reality, he attended the University of Minnesota and graduated from there. He never served in the army and instead immediately opened his own store. Mary realized that his story was a lie designed to impose a sense of guilt and manipulate her. In fact, Ming lived in a fictional world. He wrote fantasy stories about many women whom he abused, and after that, they begged him to be with them. Among these fantasies was his 9th grade math teacher. During a video interview, he revealed his intent not to cause physical pain but to inflict emotional trauma so that she would feel dirty, humiliated, and insulted. The footage included more than 6 hours of assaults. Over the next few days, a friend of Ming returned a borrowed camera but kept the tape of the torture. He abused Mary daily. Ming claimed he was not a pedophile. He never abused Elizabeth, nor did he force her to watch the torture of her mother, although he repeatedly threatened to do so. Unfortunately, this did not mean that Beth would remain on the sidelines of his villainous fantasies. Elizabeth turned out to be a pawn in his fictional stories. Ming demanded that Mary show love, but she refused because she was a believer and a devoted wife who had promised to love only her husband. To force she to submit, he threatened to place her daughter in a thick plastic bag and tie it shut, claiming that it would take 4 to 5 minutes for Beth to inhale all the oxygen, after which she would die. He also threatened to kill all the members of her family one by one until Mary obeyed. Mary was forced to meet him halfway. She kissed him on the cheek, feigning love, but this was not enough. Only a kiss on the lips calmed him down. Then he removed the bag from her daughter's head. Later, during a similar incident, he left Elizabeth in his van for 4 hours. This happened on a hot summer day, and in the scorching sun, the girl miraculously did not die. This experience finally convinced Mary of the need to obey him, otherwise, they would be in trouble. In the meantime, their family continued to hope that they would see both Mary and Elizabeth alive. Weeks went by, and according to statistics, the probability of the missing returning after such a long period was practically zero. After 2 weeks, the police called Irv and reported that they had found a woman's body in the forest, which was presumed to be Mary's. He provided his wife's dental records and was relieved to learn that it was not her, and therefore, there was still hope for the safe return of both his wife and daughter. Meanwhile, life in captivity continued. After some time, Ming softened the strict rules of the internal regulations. He allowed his captive to eat in the kitchen, take a shower on the 10th day, even gave Elizabeth several board games and a TV. He began to affectionately call her Betty. Despite the circumstances, this looked very unpleasant. During this period, Ming forced Mary to write 2 letters to her husband. In the first letter, she was to convince the police that she had not disappeared but had simply run away from her hated husband, whom she no longer loved. In the second letter, he voiced demands that the police stop their interference, or else no one would ever see either of them again. Ming still led a double life. He was involved in business management and worked in his electronics store as if nothing had happened. From the outside, it seemed that he was quite decent and that his life was completely ordinary. In reality, he was a kidnapper and a murderer. After 3 weeks, Ming took a rented mobile home and went with his victims to the fair in Chicago. Before that, they stopped at a shopping center in Madison, Wisconsin, to change clothes, as they had been wearing their old clothes since the abduction. Both victims were under close watch from him. He would not allow them to escape. He kept one of the 2 by his side, and in case of escape, he promised to kill the other. This was how he was able to grant them some relative freedom of movement, albeit within reasonable limits. Despite all of Mary's efforts to warn the police by using a receipt from her bag while shopping, the bank was notified and, unfortunately, the FBI never received the information. It apparently got lost. When Elizabeth was left unattended for a while in a shopping mall, she attempted to tell a group of teenagers that something had been stolen, but they just laughed and walked away, not believing her story. By the end of this little trip, all 3 even stopped by the University of Minnesota campus to watch fireworks. During this time, at least 3 police cars drove past them. However, Mary knew that the criminal had a gun with him, and she feared that he might harm them without thinking twice if she called for help. So she remained silent, despite her hopes. On July 7, 1980, Mary and Elizabeth faced serious difficulties. Ming realized that he could not remain in his house forever without being noticed. Therefore, he decided to buy a mobile home for the three of them, making it clear that he intended to continue this madness and wanted to eliminate any possibility of being caught. Mary understood that there might not be any other chances to escape, so she planned to wait for him to leave for work before trying to free herself. The next morning, Ming went to work as usual, and Mary began her fight for freedom. She managed to muster enough strength to remove the heavy door from its hinges, from which the captive's shackles were attached. Until that moment, they had been unable to do this. Suddenly, she heard some noise and feared that Ming had returned. Mary was instantly frightened. She acted quickly and returned everything to its original state, as if they were still tied up. They seemed to sit and listen forever until finally, they calmed down, realizing that Ming was gone. The nervous tension played a cruel joke on them, but the situation did not improve because precious time had been lost. Mary had no idea when their tormentor would return. She got to the phone and called the county sheriff's office. She was put on hold twice before finally contacting the detective who was leading the search for the three missing people. Thanks to a tag from a dry cleaner, she provided the address where she and her daughter live. Mary was most shocked by the policeman's question about whether Jason was with them. It was then that she realized that the child had never returned home and was probably killed in that forest during a stop. In fear of Ming's return, they simply hid in the storage room, afraid that their tormentor would soon come back. Fortunately, the police arrived before long, and the mother and daughter were freed. Both victims were photographed, having remained shackled with bicycle cables for almost 2 months. FBI agents went to Ming's shop, searches were conducted, and the criminal was arrested without resistance. A few days later, Mary went north to visit her family. Her happy release from captivity, along with her daughter, became a real sensation. However, in reality, their misadventures were not over yet. Just a few days after being incarcerated, Ming hired a killer. It turned out to be a cellmate, Richard Green, who was about to be released from prison. He asked Green to commit the murder of Mary and Elizabeth so that they could not testify against him. Additionally, Green was supposed to help Ming escape from prison in exchange for a promise of $50,000 once the job was done. As an advance, he handed over a check for $1,000. Fortunately, this plot failed, and the criminal was caught. Richard did not admit that he was hired. This was only discovered during a second interrogation and after checking the financial transactions. The prosecutor's office had more than enough evidence to build a strong case. The jury ultimately viewed a 3-hour interview that fully revealed Ming's insidious plan. The hearing was a tense moment for all involved. The mayor had to walk between the prosecution and defense tables. As soon as she asked Mary the first question, Ming jumped up and attacked the mayor. However, the prosecutor blocked his path. The guards knocked him down and immobilized him. The hearing lasted 10 days, after which Ming was found guilty of kidnapping. Difficulties arose even before the hearing began. He confessed to one of the psychiatrists who worked with him that he knew where the body of Jason Wilkman. He was then offered a plea bargain. The authorities agreed to reduce the charge to second-degree murder. In late October, Ming led the police to the boy's body. Jason had died from blunt force trauma to the head, inflicted from behind. Ultimately, Ming Sin Shiu was sentenced to life in prison but retained the possibility of parole after 30 years. Mary then had to testify again as a material witness in the trial for Jason's murder. It seemed that this terrible story was about to end. However, this time Ming was prepared for the meeting. He secretly brought a knife into the courtroom. During cross-examination, when Mary was answering questions, he jumped up from his chair, grabbed her by the neck from behind, and took her hostage, holding the blade near her throat. Fortunately, there was a policeman behind who managed to snatch the knife away and prevent the murder. As a result, Mary suffered a cut that went through her chin and the corner of her mouth, requiring 62 stitches. The second trial was postponed. As part of a plea bargain, Ming confessed to the kidnapping and second-degree murder of Jason, after which he was sentenced to 40 years in prison, with the terms of the sentences to be served concurrently. The case of this dangerous criminal was again in the spotlight. In 2010, the judge ruled that, in the case of parole, Ming Sen would be sent to undergo a state program for individuals who have committed violent abuse crimes. According to the judge, Ming met the criteria for criminals who require life imprisonment. After many hours of evaluating psychiatric reports, it was decided that he posed a permanent threat to society. For Mary, this decision came as a great relief, as Ming had openly declared to Beth, and then the entire family, that if he were ever released, he would come for them. Curiously, Ming's business was estimated by experts to be worth about $250,000. The Stauffer family filed a civil suit against him as compensation for illegal restriction of freedom and emotional distress. However, upon hearing about this, Mary declared that the right to seek justice belonged only to the Lord God, and she refused to pursue the case. After all these events, Mary repeatedly stated that despite all the evil this man caused, she continues to pray for him. Ming Sen Shiu is currently being held at the medium-security federal prison in Marion, Illinois. The ordeal of Mary Stauffer and her daughter Elizabeth stands as a chilling testament to the depths of obsession and the fragility of ordinary life. Yet, through nearly 2 months of unimaginable torment, Mary's unwavering faith and courage not only secured their escape but also illuminated a path of resilience for her family. The tragic death of Jason Wilkman and the scars left on the Stauffers underscore the devastating ripple effects of one individual's malice. Decades later, with Ming confined and deemed a perpetual danger, Mary's choice to forgive and pray for her captor reflects a profound strength that transcends vengeance. Her story endures as both a sobering warning of unchecked obsession and an inspiring reminder that even in the face of profound evil, hope, faith, and the human spirit can prevail. The Jacobson family seemed to have it all: wealth, success, and a beautiful home in Wellington, Florida. They appeared to be the ideal loving family. However, appearances can be misleading. Behind the facade of their perfect life lay a much darker reality. What was meant to be a joyful birthday celebration for their 2 young boys turned into a devastating event, leading to a tragedy so profound that the entire nation would remember their names. To fully grasp this story, we need to go back to 1989 when Neil Jacobson met Frankie at a gym in Bayside, Queens, New York, where they both lived and worked. They are ambitious and successful in their careers. Frankie was making her mark at Lehman Brothers, a leading firm in finance, while Neil had established his own boutique firm on Long Island. They were young, driven, and aspiring to achieve the American dream. Those who knew them praised their relationship as one filled with deep admiration and affection. Frankie was entirely devoted to Neil. In turn, he was seen as a charismatic and kind man with immense potential. Within his family and social circles, he was often regarded as a golden boy, intelligent, charming, and seemingly unstoppable. Together, Neil and Frankie appeared to be the perfect couple. They soon took the next step in their relationship by getting married and moving into Neil's home in New Jersey. Transitioning into married life was easy for them. Together, they created a comfortable, rewarding life filled with shared interests and adventures. They did everything, enjoying activities like biking, scuba diving, and weekend trips to the countryside, which helped strengthen their bond. To an outside observer, their life seemed perfect. However, amidst their seemingly ideal marriage, they felt something was missing: children. They desperately wanted to start a family, but the path to parenthood was challenging. For years, they endured the painful reality of infertility, going through multiple fertility treatments that brought both hope and disappointment. Despite the emotional toll, they remained determined. Finally, in 2003, after many struggles, their dreams came true when they welcomed twin boys, Joshua and Eric. With their lives already comfortable, Frankie and Neil experienced happiness beyond what they had ever imagined. Their family felt complete, and they thrived both personally and professionally. Neil's parents, Harold and Goldie Jacobson, moved from New Jersey to Florida in 2000. Although they loved their new home, they missed being close to their son and his family. They often expressed their frustration about the distance and wished for more time with their grandchildren. In 2005, Harold was diagnosed with cancer, and his health deteriorated rapidly, making it impossible for him to travel to New Jersey. This situation was a turning point for Neil. Being far from his father during such a critical time was too much to bear. He decided to move his family to Florida to be closer to his parents. Before the move, Neil had already started investing in real estate in Florida. He bought a pre-construction condo in Lantana and then a second one shortly after. Real estate quickly became an obsession for him, leading to the purchase of a third condo. Despite recognizing that he was stretching himself financially, he was drawn in by the booming market. Frankie, however, was concerned about his investments and questioned their practicality. Nonetheless, Neil was resolute in his decision and was not willing to change his plans. With his properties piling up in Florida, Neil began pushing Frankie to relocate. She was resistant, hesitant to leave behind the life they had built in New Jersey. She loved their home, their community, and the stability they had created. But as time passed, the financial strain of maintaining their New Jersey home became overwhelming. Eventually, Frankie reluctantly agreed to the move. The Jacobsons officially settled in Florida, eager to start a new chapter close to family. However, things did not go as planned. Neil had hoped to sell their New Jersey home before the move, but the market wasn't in his favor. Just 2 months after they arrived in Florida, tragedy struck. Harold Jacobson passed away. The loss of his father devastated Neil in ways he hadn't expected. He had uprooted his entire life to be closer to Harold, only to lose him so soon after arriving. The grief weighed heavily on him, and his mother, Goldie, later revealed that Neil had struggled with his mental health from a young age. She recalled that as a teenager, he had been diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder, an issue that had plagued him for years. Doctors had noted that Neil had an overwhelming desire to be the perfect child, a pressure that followed him into adulthood. As the years passed, his struggles with anxiety only grew, and soon, things took an even darker turn. The Great Recession hit Florida hard, and Neil, who worked as a mortgage broker. The real estate market collapsed, and the once thriving business that had allowed him to invest so freely was now crumbling beneath him. The financial security he had worked so hard to build was slipping away. As the weight of his losses grew heavier, so did the cracks in his once stable world. The Florida condos he had invested in before relocating were quickly turning into a financial nightmare. Burdened with subprime mortgages, their payments increased month after month, stretching his resources thin. At first, Neil had convinced himself that things would turn around. He had always been a problem solver, always finding ways to make things work. But this time, no amount of determination could keep the walls from closing in. With little to no work coming in, and 4 separate mortgages draining their finances. At first, Neil and Frankie tried to hold on, dipping into their savings to stay afloat. But as time passed, their financial situation only worsened. Bills piled up, debt collectors began calling, and the stress of trying to keep everything together was pushing Neil to his limits. Desperate for a solution, he started making risky financial decisions, one bad choice after another, each one digging them deeper into a hole. He chased after risky investments, sought out loans, all in a futile attempt to stop the inevitable collapse. Eventually, the weight of it all became too much to bear. The financial juggling act had run its course. Frankie was exhausted and drained, made the painful decision to stop paying the mortgages on their 3 Florida condos. It was a move that felt like surrender, but they had no choice. There was simply no more money left to give. By the year 2008, the pressure of Neil's business failures had begun to take a serious toll on his health. At first, it started with minor complaints, aches and pains that he couldn't quite explain, but as time went on, his symptoms worsened. He became sluggish, struggling to muster the energy for even the most basic tasks. His body felt heavy, and his mind clouded. He experienced random bouts of dizziness that left him feeling unstable, and he found himself unable to focus the way he used to. Concerned, he visited the family doctor, who ordered a blood test. In October, the results were troubling. Neil had elevated hormone levels, but there was no immediate explanation for his decline. As the weeks passed, his condition only worsened. The once energetic and determined man was now lethargic, withdrawn, barely functioning. He was eventually diagnosed with depression and transient peripheral vertigo, a condition that further contributed to his constant dizziness. In an attempt to help him cope, his doctor prescribed Zoloft, a common antidepressant. Neil, desperate to feel better, took the medication as prescribed, hoping it would offer some relief. But instead of improving, his mental state deteriorated further. A few days after starting Zoloft, he was called back to the doctor's office, where they added a prescription for Xanax. It was meant to ease his anxiety, but his family and friends quickly noticed that something wasn't right. Instead of stabilizing his mood, the medication seemed to send him spiraling even further into darkness. His paranoia intensified, his emotions became more erratic, and Neil they had once known began to fade before their eyes. Neil's sister, Deborah, became deeply concerned about her brother's rapid decline. She confided in their mother, worried about what he was going through. According to Deborah, Neil had started experiencing terrifying hallucinations. He had grown increasingly paranoid, convinced that someone or something was out to get him. Frankie, his wife, was just as alarmed. She desperate for support as Neil's behavior became more and more disturbing. He had completely withdrawn from the world, he refused to go outside, stopped engaging with friends and family, and even neglected his own hygiene. There were days when he wouldn't even shower, lost in a haze of fear and depression. His paranoia took a terrifying turn when he became obsessed with the idea that the FBI was watching him. He was convinced that federal agents were surveilling him, gathering evidence to have him arrested. He would talk about it constantly, warning anyone who would listen that they were building a case against him. His delusions became more elaborate. He was certain that his phone was tapped, that his home was under surveillance, and that at any moment, the authorities would storm in, take him away. His mother saw the full extent of his paranoia. One of the last times she visited him, Neil pulled her aside, his voice shaking with fear. He told her he was in big trouble, insisting that the FBI was coming for him, that he had done something terrible, though he couldn't seem to explain exactly what. The fear in his eyes was real, raw, and overwhelming. As Neil's mind unraveled, January 23, 2010. The darkness he had been wrestling with for months finally took over, and what happened next would shock everyone who had ever known him. That morning, Neil stood before his wardrobe, fumbling with the top shelf, his hands shaking as he retrieved a loaded gun. His wife, Frankie, still groggy from sleep, watched in confusion, not yet realizing the horror that was unfolding before her. Neil, with the gun in hand, stepped out of the wardrobe, his face hardening into something almost unrecognizable. Frankie's heart skipped a beat as the realization hit her. In an instant, panic took over. She leapt toward him, struggling desperately to wrest the weapon from his grasp. They tumbled to the floor, the fight becoming a chaotic blur of screams, desperation, and tears. In the midst of the struggle, Neil, in a violent frenzy, struck Frankie, knocking out her front tooth and slicing her finger. Despite the brutality of it all, Frankie didn't give up. She fought with all her strength, but Neil was too much, overpowering her in his disturbed state. With cold detachment, he stood, reloaded the gun, and turned the weapon on her. 2 shots rang out one after another, each striking her in the face, silencing her forever. But Neil's twisted path didn't end there, covered in Frankie's blood. He reloaded the gun and made his way to his son Eric's room. Eric, who had been lying on his stomach in peaceful sleep, was the next victim in the nightmare that Neil had somehow constructed in his mind. 2 bullets tore through Eric's body, but against all odds, the boy survived the first 2 shots. However, Neil was undeterred, his mind fixated on finishing what he had started. He grabbed a pillow and pressed it over Eric's face, ensuring his son wouldn't survive. 2 more shots, and Eric was gone. The house was eerily still now as Neil moved toward the next room, where his youngest son Joshua was sleeping. Joshua, blissfully unaware of the carnage around him, lay curled in his sheets. Neil's actions were methodical, almost as if he were following a script. He covered his son's face with a pillow, silencing him with 2 shots to the face. In a matter of moments, the vibrant lives of his family had been extinguished, with the blood of his wife and children staining his hands. Neil walked to the bathroom and turned on the shower. He stood under the water, numb, as if washing away the sins he could no longer escape. When the shower ended, he dressed, swallowed a cocktail of Vicodin and Xanax, in a haze, left his home. As he drove, the pills began to take effect, making him groggy and disoriented. Less than a mile from his mother's house, Neil passed out behind the wheel, swerving off the road and coming to a stop in the grass. Neil had initially planned to kill his mother next before taking his own life. But in his twisted state, something inside him held him back. He later told the police that when he was at home, standing in a living room, he thought about going to heaven to be with his father, but he couldn't leave his mother alone, so he planned to take her with him. Thankfully, he never made it to her house. When the police found him, Neil was disoriented, barely conscious, and gripping the gun beside him. As they approached, he muttered, "I killed my family," in a dazed and broken voice. The investigation raised many questions. Was Neil a victim of the side effects of his medications, or had he planned this horrific act all along? A suicide note found later suggested that Neil may have been preparing for this moment, leaving many to wonder whether he was driven by his medications or if he had, at some point, simply snapped. His attorney's defense centered around his mental state. They argued that he had been suffering from severe depression, anxiety, and paranoia, all of which had been worsened by the medications he was taking. They described Neil overwhelmed by financial ruin, haunted by the fear that the FBI was watching him, and convinced that there was no way out. His legal team insisted that he had not acted out of hatred or rage but had instead been driven to an unimaginable breaking point due to the side effects of his prescription drugs. To support their argument, the defense brought in medical experts who testified about the dangers of Zoloft and Xanax, the two medications Neil had been prescribed before the murders. These drugs, they explained, could cause extreme mood swings, hallucinations, and suicidal tendencies, especially when taken together in high doses. Neil's behavior before the killings, his paranoia, delusions, and refusal to leave the house, was presented as clear evidence that he had lost his grip on reality. His lawyers pushed the narrative that Neil had been a loving father and husband, a man who had never shown any signs of violence before, making it hard to believe that he had killed his family intentionally. But the prosecution had a different story to tell. They painted Neil not as a victim of medication but as a desperate man who had methodically planned the murders. They argued that his financial troubles had reached a boiling point, and that instead of facing them, he had chosen to take his family's lives in an act of ultimate control. They pointed to the way he had executed the killings, retrieving his gun, reloading it multiple times, and ensuring that no one survived. To them, this was not the act of a man lost in a haze of confusion but one who had made a deliberate and calculated decision. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence against Neil was the suicide note found in his home. The note indicated that he had thought through his actions and accepted what he was about to do. It wasn't the frantic scribblings of someone in the middle of a psychotic episode. It was organized, reflective in the prosecution's view, proof of premeditation. If he had truly been unaware of his actions, why would he have left behind such a message? The prosecution also called witnesses to testify about Neil's behavior leading up to the murders. His sister, Deborah, had noticed a dramatic shift in his personality. He had become increasingly paranoid. His wife, Frankie, had confided in Deborah that Neil was no longer the man she had married. He had stopped showering, refused to leave the house, and seemed trapped in his own mind. While the defense used these accounts to argue that Neil was suffering from a mental breakdown, the prosecution used them to show that there had been warning signs that should have led Neil to seek professional help instead of resorting to murder. Neil's mother, Goldie, also played a heartbreaking role in the trial. She had been one of the last people to see him before the tragedy. She recalled how Neil had told her, "Mom, I love you, no matter what happens." The courtroom fell silent. At the time, she hadn't thought much of it, but in hindsight, it was clear he had been preparing for what he was about to do. Goldie, who had always seen her son as a kind and loving man. She struggled to reconcile the Neil she knew with the one on trial for murder. As the trial progressed, the jury was left to decide whether Neil Jacobson had truly been in a state of antidepressants-induced psychosis or if he had coldly and deliberately murdered his wife and children. The prosecution emphasized that Neil had made a series of conscious choices, loading his gun, aiming at his loved ones, and pulling the trigger multiple times. They argued that no matter what struggles he was facing, nothing justified what he had done. The defense, on the other hand, urged the jury to consider his mental state, to see him as a broken man who had been consumed by fear, paranoia, and desperation. After days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict: guilty on all counts. The judge, while acknowledging the tragedy of the situation, made it clear that no level of financial distress or mental illness excused the murder of innocent children and a devoted wife. Neil Jacobson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His fate was sealed, and the courtroom was filled with an overwhelming sense of loss. Neil Jacobson reached a plea deal with the state. He changed his plea from not guilty to guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. He stated that the reason was the family's mounting financial situation. Now, he will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Neil Jacobson answered to the judge in the Palm Beach County courtroom, admitting that he shot his wife, Frankie, and then shot their twin 7-year-old sons while they were asleep in their Wellington home back. During the family's turn to speak in court, Neil held his head down and never looked up. Even after the trial ended, many questions remained. Could this tragedy have been prevented if Neil had received different treatment? Were the medications to blame, or was he simply a man who refused to face his failures? No one could say for certain what had driven him to this point. However, what was undeniable was that a mother and 2 young boys had lost their lives in the most horrific way possible. Nothing could ever undo that.